After years of hopes and dreams, months of speculation and months of excitement, Persona 3 finally got a remake in February of 2024, and I wanted to share my thoughts on it, as a remake of one of my favorite games of all time, but also as a standalone entry in the series. Both how it presents this experience, how it holds up compared to the older versions, but also as a game on its own. I should mention that there will be spoilers in this video though. In the first few segments, as you can see in the timestamps, I talk about my story with Persona 3 and why I love this game so much. Those parts are spoiler free, but afterwards, when the actual reload review starts, I do delve into more details and spoiler territory. With that out of the way though, I am very excited to finally review Persona 3 on my channel, and judging by the length of the script, this is gonna be a long one. So get comfy and, I don't know, put this on in the background while doing some Tartarus runs or whatever. I first experienced Persona 3 through FES, which I definitely played legally and definitely didn't emulate back in 2020. This is the first re-release of the original Persona 3, and while I didn't have the smoothest experience, I ended up really loving it. Before that, I had already played the original Persona 5, Persona 5 Royal, and Persona 4 Golden, but 3 quickly became my favorite. The reason that it wasn't the smoothest experience is because there were some elements that needed some getting used to, a combat system in which you can't control your party members, forced romances, reversed social links, the tired or exhaustion mechanics, stuff like that. But there were also some genuine issues that I found with it. Some characters could have used a bit more screen time, the social activities are quite limited and restrictive, especially at night. You know, just kind of what you'd expect, considering that Persona 3 is like 20 years old and it was the first game to have the Persona formula that we know today. But while I had my issues and while the game hasn't aged the best in all aspects, Persona 3 was still a really special game to me. The characters, the story, the themes, the music, just the whole experience. Once I got used to the hurdles that I mentioned earlier, this game really resonated with me. Even with its flaws, it's the experience that counts after all. I'd gladly take a flawed game over a perfectly rated game if it can deliver an experience like this. But even then, ever since I finished it, I've been pretty vocal about wanting a remake. I wanted the story to be more accessible for people, and I wanted to replay it with some of the flaws ironed out of it. But I also wanted this game to get a second chance, for it to reach its full potential. Persona 3 established the foundation of modern Persona, and the games after it used that foundation and fleshed it out. So why not revisit that foundation with these fleshed out mechanics, updated controls and improvements? And that desire for a remake only grew after I played Persona 3 Portable in 2023, because while that game added some elements that I was really fond of, a bigger focus on some characters, some extra Tartarus features, it even added a bonus female route which was really cool for replays, but it also had some very noticeable problems. The presentation of everything was an extreme downgrade with the point-and-click exploration. Some of the new romances felt kinda forced and fanfiction-y. Some small scenes were altered or cut. The cutscenes were gone. You had controllable party members, yes, but the game wasn't really rebalanced to fit this new system. Don't get me wrong, I don't dislike Portable. I really enjoyed my time with it, but with all that being said, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for new players. The downgrades are pretty substantial, and while the new content does make it worth playing, it's definitely something for a replay. So while Portable was the newest version of Persona 3 and the most readily available, they even ported it recently to modern platforms, so it was finally available in HD, it didn't really help Persona 3 reach the heights that it could. So the situation didn't change. I even started my channel with a video in which I discussed my dreams of a hypothetical remake, but that's all it was at the time, just pure hopes and dreams. Until one day, rumors started surfacing, we all started speculating, and then it finally got revealed at the Xbox Summer Showcase in 2023. Or, at least that's what I would be saying if Atlas didn't leak the reveal trailer on Instagram the day before. Fast forward a bit though, and 2 playthroughs and a platinum trophy later, I can finally say that I was not disappointed in the slightest with Reload. Now, of course, as a game, I would have always enjoyed Reload to some extent, as it is still a remake of one of my favorite games of all time. Be it the OG, FES, Portable or Reload, every version of Persona 3 is valid and worth playing because they're all Persona 3, a game that's incredibly special to me and to many others. But you might be wondering now, what is it about Persona 3 that is so special to this guy? Well, there's just something about this experience that resonated with me on a very personal level. I've always been drawn towards games with a heavy emphasis on characters, and as a franchise, in the way that it's built, Persona is extremely character-focused. You really get to know everyone in these games, be it your party members, the side characters, your classmates, or the owners of the local bookshop, to give a random example. You get to know them, you get to know their struggles, and you learn to care about them through their social links. And the game gives you the opportunity to grow closer to these characters at basically every moment of your playtime. Even in the dungeons, instead of just grinding, they make it feel like you're spending time with your party members and you're growing closer together through some small talk that feels natural, or in the way that some character arcs are integrated into the gameplay. But outside of a focus on characters, I also really care about games as an experience. I love games that are extremely focused on exploring a core theme or idea, and having that idea be represented in every part of its being. And that's something that Persona 3 does exceptionally well. Everything is so intrinsically connected. The gameplay, the story, the characters, and the entire structure all work as one whole. The calendar system relentlessly counts down with every activity, bringing you to the next main story beat while giving each moment the build-up that it needs and giving the aftermath the needed breathing room. But it also gives you the feeling of time and life continuing no matter what. You can spend your time grinding in the dungeons or going to your part-time job for some extra cash. You can level your social stats, or you can hang out with your social links. These social links then help you connect to this world and its characters while also serving a gameplay purpose, by integrating the Persona Tarot system or by unlocking special personas after completing a link. You can unlock these links either through social stats, other social links, or through the main story. And to top it all off, all of their stories, while they might not seem that important to the greater narrative at first glance, thematically they're all connected to the core message of this game, which turns Persona 3 into an extremely strong and cohesive experience. It's a structure that's very interconnected in both gameplay and story, and micromanaging all of these things is extremely satisfying in my opinion. Especially because time is limited and it's quite challenging to see all that this game has to offer in a single playthrough, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible either. This whole structure, albeit with some small alterations, is of course present in every Persona game, but it was still originally created for this experience. And while the other games did a fantastic job at adapting the system, throughout the game it's very clear to me that it was created for Persona 3, and in my opinion it's the game that utilizes the system in the best way. But it's also the inherent focus in the individual elements, like the setting, the characters and the narrative, that put this one above the rest for me. The way that the game starts off and you kind of don't know what you're doing. You're exploring Tartarus and you join Seas, but why? Like, is this even a good thing to do? You are kind of forced into this situation and they're telling you that it's the right thing to do, but is it really? The story starts off slow, but as you fight more bosses, you start to learn more about this world, you meet new characters, each with a different view on the situation, and slowly you uncover the truth about everything. The truth behind your powers, your enemies, your friends, the creation of Tartarus, and the purpose that it serves. It's a narrative that's really mysterious, and puzzling it all together as you watch everything reveal itself over time is super satisfying. Also on a character level, I talked earlier about how this game always puts the characters front and center, and I'll go into detail later, but what I really like about this game is that there are also a lot of scenes from the perspective of the side characters. The protagonist isn't always required to be there for them to get their development, and boy do they get their development. Junpei, for example, starts off as the classic bro character, looking for the spotlight, trying to be the hero but also hitting on girls all the time, sometimes in acceptable ways, sometimes not so much, but he means well. But throughout the game he goes on to have this incredible character arc through a heartfelt romance subplot, or the friendship between Yukari and Mitsuru, two characters that are great in their own right and have a lot of individual growth, but they also have this very well-developed relationship. There's a lot of distrust at first, but as they grow through their personal story, in turn they're also able to form a great friendship. Or Aegis, a literal robot who learns about what it is to be human. As she grows closer to her new friends and she starts to question the meaning behind her existence. Which lies very close to the core message of Persona 3, as it is a game about life itself. And that's why the calendar system works the best thematically in this game. As I said, it was quite literally created for this story. The days are counting down with every activity. You might not be able to do everything in one playthrough, but just like in the game, life has a finite duration and you might not be able to achieve every single thing. You make choices every day, be it something small or something bigger. You make those decisions never knowing what the consequences will be or how it will affect your relationships. And no matter what happens, life goes on. You're always dragged back into the same rhythm of daily life. But that's okay, because most importantly, the game is about how all of those things make every moment matter. How your bonds with your friends and family matters, how important memories are, and that even with all the hardships and loss that you will experience, life is still beautiful. And while death is unavoidable, that doesn't have to be the end, as your memories and ideals can carry on through these bonds. It's part of what gives life meaning. And that's what Persona 3 is about. That's the core message that this game explores with every fiber of its being. People often look at Persona 3 and think that it's just a depressing emo game, and while yeah, the game does get dark and depressing many times as it's exploring these themes of life, death and humanity, but the core message of Persona 3 is a positive one. To live life to the fullest and to enjoy every moment. To enjoy the little moments and to not take them for granted. Because while you might not think much of these little moments at the time, one day they can become precious memories to look back on fondly. I love these darker stories, because it's often those stories that can tell you a very positive message, while maybe emotionally scarring you a few times on the way. But these emotional peaks can only impact you if the game does enough to connect you to this narrative and these characters, which is exactly what Persona excels at. And that is why I love Persona 3. It's so extremely focused on what it sets out to achieve. The core message is present everywhere, in every character, in the main narrative, in the small side stories, and even down to how the game is structured. There is not a single element that is wasted. So not only is it an extremely poignant experience, but it also really focuses on all of the things that I personally love, and it left an impact on me that no piece of media has ever been able to recreate. Plus, you get a dog as your party member. How can you not love this game? But while Persona 3 as a whole is very special to me, it is still a game, and games have flaws. Some of them are genuine flaws, and other flaws are because of its age or because of the hardware that they were made for. But this also makes for some unique flavors and charms specific to each version. And every remake, of course, runs the risk of losing part of that charm. But that's also fine. A perfect remake doesn't exist, and these remakes also don't replace their original versions. I'm sure that someone out there prefers the original Persona 3 over FES, or maybe they prefer Portable over Reload. The games are all out there, and that's important to keep in mind. Games are a special form of media, a special form of art, and there's a lot of nuance that goes into these experiences. You can't just replace one of them with a shiny new re-release, because there will always be a difference. A difference that might seem small to some, but it will be detrimental to others. So your experience will also differ because of that. I'm sorry if this kind of sounds like a disclaimer, but with the way that online discussions go nowadays, I just wanted to make that clear. While I might think that Reload is a near perfect remake and a dream come true, not everyone will think that way. But in this video, I'm gonna talk about my perspective on Reload. So with all that out of the way, I guess it's finally time to talk about Persona 3 Reload in specific. From the visuals and presentation to the narrative and the characters, and how it changed as a game which remade Tartarus and gameplay systems. The most obvious change and, in my opinion, improvement over any previous version of Persona 3 or just over any Persona game before it is of course the visuals. Because in my opinion this game looks absolutely beautiful and it was insane to see Persona 3 look this good, both graphically and presentation wise. In the introduction to each area the camera would pan around to showcase what it has to offer. For new players it's of course to showcase the facilities that you will be able to access over the course of the game. But for returning players, it just gives this incredible feeling of returning home. Or maybe it was just me. They were super faithfully created, but also had some small tweaks to make it feel new and fresh. From being able to go up the stairs in the strip mall without the screen cutting to black, to being able to look out of your classroom window and seeing the courtyard and the train station in the distance, while also having the classroom slightly reflected back to you. To the Velvet Room being around the corner and hearing the noises of the city fade away as you approach this otherworldly door. And while exploring these beautiful places, you're also listening to the newly arranged soundtrack. I'm gonna be honest, as someone who played the original many times, these did take some getting used to. But now I can safely say that I don't think they missed with a single track. There are still some songs that I prefer from the original, but that doesn't make their new versions bad by any means. But for most of the songs, like Changing Seasons or The Dorm Team, I vastly prefer the newer renditions. And the new songs like Color Your Night, Full Moon Full Life or It's Going Down Now are just peak cinema. In general, while a lot of people were against it at first, I'm honestly really glad that they redid the OST, because everything in this game is redone, even the voice acting, so it's only fitting that the OST gets a new coat of paint as well. And doing it with a new vocalist while still having Lotus Juice there makes for the perfect mix of something fresh that still feels like Persona 3. It was just a joy to listen to the soundtrack while exploring the city, and the city felt so much more full of life compared to the originals as well, where those games barely had NPCs. In Reload the city is filled with them just going about their day. You can even listen in on some of them or join some of their conversations to see how their life changes over the course of the main story and how they're impacted by the events. I feel like I don't have to go into detail on every single visual thing. You'll be seeing a lot of it throughout this video and maybe you played the game yourself, but I do think that this game is visually incredible and I often found myself just looking around, wandering around and taking in the world and the atmosphere. Same thing with the artworks and the UI by the way, it's absolutely beautiful and filled with attention to detail. But while the game does look incredible in most areas, there are a few things to criticize here. Compared to how most locations look, it is kind of sad to see that the lighting in the dorm feels kind of off. Like, a lot of the objects don't cast any shadows, and when they do, they often don't make sense in the context of the room. Color-wise as well, the dorm just looks strangely bright, especially when you look at it side to side with the movies or the original games. It's not bad by any means, but it is quite a tonal shift, and I can't help but prefer the tone of the older versions. Another thing that I want to talk about is the Dark Hour filter, because every single Dark Hour section in Persona 3 Reload is just extremely green. Maybe this is just a Persona 6 marketing technique, but it is a bit much. But even with that point of criticism though, I am double on it, because it gives the Dark Hour this otherworldly and supernatural vibe, which is especially striking when you're visiting familiar locations like Paulownia Mall. And just in general, there are some beautiful shots here, but the one that's been talked about the most, and it's also the most different, is the final boss arena. It's been getting a lot of criticism online because in the OG, the night sky is kind of a blend between a normal night and the Dark Hour. This is done to signify the importance of this fight. The Dark Hour has reached its peak and it's starting to blend into the real world. But while Reload takes a different approach, different doesn't always mean bad, as I can definitely see what they were going for here. Making the Dark Hour filter more intense for this battle shows that we've reached the peak of Tartarus. We're closer to the moon than ever before and the Dark Hour is stronger than ever before, all the while having the color scheme of the final boss contrast this to show how far above the rest this being really is. Both show that the Dark Hour is stronger than ever, but it's just being shown in a different way. Reload is made for current-gen consoles in 2024. We are in a completely different situation compared to when the original Persona 3 was made, so of course we're not gonna get the exact same vibe compared to a PS2 game from 2006. 2006. The game has been completely remade, and we had different people working on it. People who probably wanted to add their own flavor to this, but while also being respectful to the original. It's just bound to happen with a complete remake. So while the vibe and atmosphere does differ from the original, I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. I don't think it devalues this remake, and I don't think that this is soulless or that it removes the identity of Persona 3, as I've seen some people say it does. And whichever one you prefer just comes down to personal preference at the end of the day. I might be getting a little ahead of myself here though, as I'm already talking about the final boss. But that was just an example of what I meant with the ups and downs of the Dark Hour presentation and just the visual changes in general. Overall, I think Reload is stunning to look at, and I do prefer the Reload rendition of many scenes and segments, but there are some moments where I do still prefer the OG. But those are just my overall thoughts on the visuals. I do want to highlight some specific moments, but I'll talk about those as I talk about the narrative in more detail. I'm not gonna do a full retrospective on the story here though, I feel like we all know how Persona 3 goes, so I'm just gonna give my thoughts on certain events and characters and on how they decided to remake this. Because the story is basically the exact same as the original game, but that also doesn't mean that it's a one-to-one retelling, as they expanded on quite a few characters, but it all stays within the lines of what defines a remake. Persona 3 Reload is confident in what it is. It's confident in the original and it respects the original. Instead of changing or reimagining the story, Reload is a faithful adaptation that takes what was there and seeks to improve on it. It never really changes stuff unnecessarily, but that also doesn't mean that they're afraid to touch it up. These changes don't change the direction or the message of the narrative, but they're used to flesh out existing characters and their arcs, give more depth, extra backstory. In other words, Persona 3 Reload takes the narrative of the original and it expands on it where needed, but it's also confident enough to let the original work shine. It just helps it shine that a little bit brighter. And that is of course why we're all here. It doesn't matter if you're a new or returning player, you come to Persona 3 Reload to experience Persona 3, and that's what you get. Which is in my opinion the best way to do a remake. But what exactly did they do then? Because while I have been praising the way that they elevated this narrative, I haven't really gone into detail yet. What Reload mainly focuses on is fleshing out our cast of characters, and that's then also what I want to talk about first, starting with the male party members, because in FES or in the original they didn't have social links. For most characters this wasn't a major issue however, as most of their development happens throughout the main story, but not being able to hang out with characters like Ken, Akihiko or Junpei outside of the narrative was always a bit strange, especially since you could hang out with your female party members, which then added some extra depth to them. Portable is where they first addressed this and where these characters first got social links, which is then in my opinion also the main draw for playing Persona 3 Portable. But the way that Portable chose to go about it was to replace quite a bit of the original social links for the female route. And while I would say that that was an okay solution, it was far from perfect. I'm not really a fan of cutting content, even if the male route in Portable still had the original links, but that also meant that this issue wasn't exactly fixed either. The solution was just applied to this new route. And even then they had to build the stories of these characters around the fact that they were social links, which made for some awkward romances and some links that were longer than they needed to be, which made them feel kind of fillery or awkward. In the worst cases, they would even result in undermined character arcs. Like, depending on when you engage with Junpei's link for example, it could be very jarring, as social link Junpei doesn't always complement main narrative Junpei, unless you decide to engage with it at very specific moments. And while the game does limit you to some extent, you could do most of these social links just whenever they unlock, which made it a bit weird, and it also limited them in what they could focus or expand upon. In some cases, like with Shinjiro for example, who did benefit from the extra screen time, it worked well, but for others it kinda just felt tacked on at points. And opposite to what you'd expect, a lot of these social links were far from the best ones that you could do in the female route. So Reload decided to go another direction with this by creating a whole new gameplay element known as the link episodes. Every male SEAS member gets 5 of these, and where social links become available on a certain day and follow a set weekly schedule, link episodes unlock depending on where you are in the narrative, and you only have a small window to complete them before they're gone forever. And if you ask me, I think think that link episodes are a fucking genius idea. Not only do they give us more screen time with each character that doesn't have a social link, deepening our bond with them, but these link episodes also play directly into the main narrative, which allows them to both strengthen the individual characters, but also deepen your understanding of the current arc in the game. And while these are completely original events to reload, a lot of them do take inspiration from their portable social links, which makes sense since we're of course talking about the same characters. Outside of that, they also take some inspiration from Persona 4 Arena, as that is a sequel to not only Persona 4, but also Persona 3, with most of the main cast returning. Things like Junpei becoming a baseball player and Akihiko traveling the world to become stronger are elements that are given some extra setup and context in these episodes. Thankfully, it is done in a way that feels natural though. You probably wouldn't even notice it if you didn't play Arena, but if you do end up playing those games now, it makes the transition feel a bit more natural. Only a bit though, because in Arena they kind of take these characteristics very far. While they have interesting ideas, a lot of the characters kinda turn into a parody or a caricature. Akihiko, for example, in Arena is just a big strong guy who has to mention protein at least once in every single sentence. While in Reload he does talk about protein more now compared to the original, and while there are more jokes about his strength training, it doesn't change who he is. It's just a small gag here and there, in the same way that Aigis keeps learning new phrases from Junpei. But while these episodes do take inspiration from Arena and Portable, ultimately they are their own thing, and they focus on strengthening the arc that these characters go on in the main narrative, by creating scenarios where the characters are individually explored. Junpei's Link episodes start off simple. At the beginning of the game he's trying to be your friend, so you unlock his very first episode very early in the game. You just get to know each other better and you learn more about him wanting to become a hero. He makes it very clear that he wants to be in the spotlight. But later in the game, as Junpei gets involved with Chidori, you get a Link episode which explores his struggles with her in more detail. He's always such an upbeat guy, and during this arc he genuinely feels at a loss. Seeing him open up to the protagonist and asking for advice is such a nice thing to see, as it really strengthens his arc and this relationship, which I already loved from the OG. And then when we get closer to the end of the game, you get a Link episode where you're reflecting on everything that happened in the past year, and how this shaped Junpei as a person. He apologizes to the protagonist for how immature he used to be, and he sets his sights on the future. Having this happen in a one-to-one talk outside of the story was honestly a beautiful scene to show how far he's come. Same thing with Ken, who, similarly to in the main narrative, he starts off his social link episodes with the cool guy facade, where he's taking you out for dinner. But over time he slowly opens up to you, and he shows you his pet hamster, Hamburger, who is, I'm pretty sure, just a PNG. I wonder if he knows about that. But as his Link episodes go on, he opens up about his past. He talks about what happened to his mom and the incident with Shinjiro, and about how he's scared to not be taken seriously as he is the youngest of the team. But it also highlights how he starts to overcome that as he asks you to train with him. It's just really nice to see this specific friendship develop between the protagonist and Ken, as this is a relationship that we don't really see that much of in the OG. I also really like how the other characters show up for these episodes. It's just the boys hanging out, and I really like moments like this, because outside of highlighting Ken's character arc, it also shows how the team has grown closer. The main narrative of course highlights this for the team in general and for some very specific dynamics, but to see this happen in these smaller groups is really wholesome, and it works incredibly well with the whole team of establishing bonds and creating memories together. It's especially important for Ken's episodes though, as him wanting to be seen as a part of the team is a very big part of his character arc. In the case of Akihiko, I also especially appreciated how his Link episodes put a focus on his past. When I was playing Fest or Portable, they do talk about his past with Miki and the orphanage, but it's always kept extremely vague. While here, they do explore that a little bit more. He used to be like a big brother to everyone living in the orphanage, and that reflects on his behavior at the dorm in the current time. While he might seem a bit clueless at times, and while characters would laugh at him for missing social cues, people do rely on him as he organizes things like the pancake party.
It's pancake party time, as they say.
and the big brother role fits him extremely well as it complements his goal to protect everyone. First with Miki and now with Cease, who might as well be his newfound family. Also, similarly to Ken's episodes, there are a lot of moments here that showcase both Akihiko and the protagonist's relationship, but also Akihiko's relationship with the rest of the group, which shows exactly what Akihiko is trying to protect. Maybe there wasn't anything major in here, but these episodes really helped me connect to Akihiko as a character and his role within Cease. And then you have Koromaru's Link. I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't planning on talking about every Link episode, but this kinda happened, so let's just roll with it. Koromaru's Link is probably the smallest one though, but it does flesh out his connection to the priest, the shrine, and the city as a whole. It was just a really nice addition to hang out with the best boy some more. And I'm gonna be honest, the protagonist promising to Koromaru that he will adopt him once everything is over does hurt me very deeply in my soul, knowing what will happen. I don't know, there's not that much to say about Koromaru's episodes. It is really funny how they always need a random NPC to walk by though. It of course does show his connection to the town, and like obviously Koromaru is a dog and he can't talk, but I do think it's kinda amusing that whenever we decide to spend time together, there just happens to be someone nearby who can lore dump us about Koromaru. But again, while Koromaru's Link episodes might not be anything major, they do kind of work double time, as they're not only a Link episode for Koromaru the dog, but also for Tatsumi Port Island as a city, which is a very nice addition. And now I talked about all of them. All but one. And my god, where do I even begin? Shinjiro as a character has always been an extremely important part to the story of Persona 3, but compared to all of the other characters, it's no question that he had the least screen time out of all of them. Even in Reload, that is true, as Shinjiro is mostly in the background until he joins your party on September 2nd. And only 1 month later, Shinjiro dies, as Cease suffers its first casualty. Before this, while the group did have their roadblocks, their progression had been going relatively smooth. The pacing was also a bit slower, as we were very much focused on building up all of these characters and plot points, but this is where the game starts to hand out emotional trauma and massive reveals on a pretty regular basis. This moment, Shinjiro's death, is the turning point, and because of that, it has to hit. So they need to make you care for Shinjiro and his relationship with Cease, or that pivotal moment might fall flat. Shinjiro was always great, this moment was always great, there's a reason why it's such an iconic scene. It's not like Reload made it iconic, but I did always have this feeling of him maybe being underutilized a bit in the original Orange Fest, but his Link episodes really went above and beyond in all of the right ways. Of course, it was always a very intentional narrative decision to give Shinjiro the least amount of screen time. It ties back to the main themes of the game and how every moment matters, and no matter how much time you spend with someone, they can still leave an impact, but I feel like even with the extended focus, Reload doesn't go overboard and thus still achieves the same thing. From the outside, Shinjiro is the classic delinquent character, skipping his classes, hanging around in the shady back streets, stuff like that. But his story arc serves to show another side of him, a more caring side. And his Link episodes emphasize this as he cooks for the other dorm members and as you go out with him to grab food a couple of times. Over time, he starts to open up to the protagonist, who he slowly started to respect, talking about the situation of why he isn't attending school or why he decided to return to Cease after everything that went down, opening up about the fact that he doesn't have much longer to live and that he's trying to use the time that he has left to set things straight. But some of these Link episodes are also partly told of the perspective of Mitsuru, who talks about their friendship with Akihiko and Shinjiro before the events of the game, because they are the original Cease trio. We get flashbacks of them exploring Tartarus, of them going to school, and she tells us about the promise that they made together. It's also really nice that this is coming from Mitsuru, as Shinji and Akihiko already interact a lot during the main narrative, and while we always knew that she was also friends with them, it was kind of an element that wasn't explored that much. And putting an extra focus on this doesn't only strengthen their individual characters, but it also strengthens the relationship that these three had together. And all of this makes October 4th hit harder than it ever did before. Same thing with the aftermath. The story always showed Ken struggling to find a new reason to live, but these extra moments with him shows even more of this, and it shows more of his journey to regain his resolve. I haven't really mentioned the new voice cast yet in this video, but while I'm talking about the October 4th incident, I can't not mention the fact that all of the new VAs did an incredible job. For the English dub, Reload recasted basically every single character, besides for Elizabeth. Some of them sound very close to the original voices, like Cena Robinson's Junpei for example, but others put their own personal spin on them, like Alejandro Saab's Akihiko. Because of this new take on some characters, a lot of fans, including me, were kind of skeptical about this change pre-release. In Persona games, you do get really connected to these characters, and of course their voices are a big part of this connection. But I think that the new VAs absolutely nailed their roles, every single one of them. Even the characters that sound very different from their original voices, it just feels right for the character. Both in the small moments where it's just them hanging out, and in the emotional scenes where they're showing their most vulnerable side. If they ever decide to make more Persona spin-offs that includes the Persona 3 cast, I'll be happy to hear them reprise their roles again. And you know, it's Atlus, so the likeliness of more spin-offs being made is pretty big. And as a side note, most of the old voice actors also came back for this game, by the way, with them taking over smaller roles. It's a small thing, but it's really cool, and it goes to show how much care they put into this game, as this is literally just a small nod to the original that they didn't have to do at all, but it's so nice once you realize it. All of the voice actors did a fantastic job in this game, and that's why I just wanted to highlight them for a second here. Getting back on track though, all in all, these Link episodes were just fantastic and they really went above and beyond. The ideas, concepts and character journeys explored in these episodes were of course always part of their character, but to have these extra scenes that showcase specific dynamics, that expand on certain aspects, and that just give you more one-on-one time with the characters during specific moments really added to the overall experience for me. Atlus could have taken it easy and gone the extremely faithful route of not adding anything for these characters. That's how it was in FES and the OG, so that honestly seemed very likely to me when the game first got announced. Or they could have gone the very chaotic route and added 5 more social links to this already massive game by taking cues from Portable. Or they could have just expanded on some scenes in the main narrative and give these characters extra time to shine. But they didn't. They introduced an entirely new way to interact with these characters, which takes the best parts from social links and manages to tie them directly into their arcs from the main narrative, which is more than I ever could have asked for. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot to mention this, but doing these Link episodes also gives you some stat bonuses, and it even unlocks a special Persona fusion for each one you complete, which again ties it back to the gameplay and gives you some extra incentive to complete these. How nice of them. Thanks, Atlus. But while the guys definitely got the most new content out of Seas, the group as a whole also got some new events. Some of these happened during the Link episodes, like the aforementioned Pancake Party.
It's pancake party time, as they say.
But they also got some new scenes, like them going to the ramen place in January, or other scenes that were already present in the original versions were altered or extended. I know it's small, but just adding a scene of them getting some food together or having the protagonist display souvenirs of all of their memories in his room really reinforced their friendship, and it showed how close they got over the course of the story. Before Reload, people would often say that Seas didn't feel like a group of friends, they more felt like colleagues, and while I personally never agreed with that take, thankfully I haven't seen that criticism since the release of Reload. They feel like a genuine group of friends. Yeah, they came together under some unfortunate circumstances, and they didn't become best friends from the first second that they met, but they grew closer throughout the game, and these are characters that I can genuinely see hanging out together in their free time, even without the protagonist being there, which is a good thing, as they should probably get used to hanging out without him. That was supposed to be a joke, but now I'm just sad. All in all, their relationship is something that this game presents in a beautiful way. I always loved them. Seas was my favorite dynamic out of the main Persona groups, but Reload's additions really added to the overall experience and elevated them even more for me. But outside of Seas, they also added in some small events for other characters, or other groups. One of these being Strega. The additions to Strega are a bit smaller in the grander scheme of things though, but from their group, Takaya is definitely the character who benefits the most from this. He gets some new one-on-one interactions with the protagonist, they show some more of his backstory, and they talk some more about his motivations, and he gets some new scenes with Jin as well. And I feel like that's kind of everything he needed. Spoilers for Persona 4 and 5, I guess, but as antagonists, I don't think that they need a full social link like Akechi or Adachi. They don't really need to grow closer to the protagonist, and we definitely don't need an accomplice ending. It was just nice to have some more interactions with Takaya and to get a closer look at his ideology. Plus, these new scenes also come with some really cool details. Like, depending on your dialogue options with him during these new scenes, he gets a different moveset and dialogue for his final boss fight. Or in the battle against Strega on the bridge, he can also use Shift with Jin, which is a really cool way to show their connection. It shows how close they are and it makes the fight more unique. Shifting over from Takaya to Jin for a moment though, I do feel like he could have maybe used a little bit more. It's not like Reload doesn't give him anything, he does have that scene together with Takaya at the hideout, we do get more of Strega's backstory that I mentioned, and by showing more of Takaya they also do strengthen his bond with Jin, but outside of that, Jin is Jin. He's not bad by any means, but he's still very much a right hand to Takaya, and that's about it. And then of course we have the final Strega member, Chidori, and I don't think she gets any new scenes, and if she did, they were probably very minor additions. But Chidori is and always has been a great character, and her relationship with Junpei is a phenomenal part of Persona 3. It's incredibly well written, and I love the way that it influences all of the characters involved. I especially like that it takes place over a longer stretch of time, where Persona is usually very structured in separated arcs. I love how this is the opposite of that. At times it takes the main spotlight, and at other times it goes back into the background. But it's always something to keep in mind, as it's actively shaping Junpei throughout the whole game. Now that I'm talking about Chidori though, maybe this is a good time to mention that yes, you can still save her life in Reload. This is a bit of a controversial plot decision that was carried over from both FES and Portable, and while I'm usually not really a fan of these things, like there's a reason that it's controversial, her death is a very meaningful event and it carries a lot of weight throughout the narrative. And as I said, usually I'm not really a fan of these things, like in Portable, you can save Shinjiro's life. Kind of, because, you know, Shinjiro is a dying man and he will still die eventually. He's just not gonna die from the bullet wound on October 4th, because you give him a pocket watch and the pocket watch stops the bullet. Instead, he goes into a coma and he's written out of the plot that way. It's really weird and it feels a bit like fan service, because he shows up in the end and he's like, Kotone, yes. Because it's only in the female route. I'm starting to rant, aren't I? TLDR, it kind of just goes against his whole arc, and because of that it feels more like a fanservice-y Easter egg. So I'm happy that Reload took that out. But with that being said, I honestly feel like Chidori is one of the rare cases where it kind of works, just because of the way that it's executed. For those who don't know, I'll just do a quick TLDR, because from what I've noticed, a lot of people still miss this or still don't know about this. During the month of November, you will have a Link episode with Junpei where he talks about his ongoing dilemma with Chidori. She's been refusing his company, but he obviously wants to be by her side. So does he keep visiting her to show that he's there for her, or does he listen and stay away? During the episode, Junpei considers buying these white flowers for her as a gift, but in the end he decides to go against it. As a protagonist though, you can buy these flowers and give them to him, which pushes him over the edge to visit her anyway. And then later in the game, it's revealed that Chidori repeatedly used her persona abilities to transfer her life energy into these flowers, so they would be preserved for longer, as they of course reminded her of Junpei. But after her death, the life energy that she stored in these flowers would return to her. But as we saw in her death scene, when she gave her life energy to Junpei, her persona media also fused with his persona. So when she wakes up, she doesn't have her persona anymore, and along with it, she lost all of her memories. She doesn't remember the Dark Hour, or the experiments, or Strega, or even Junpei. But as the group finds out about this, Junpei remarks that maybe this isn't a bad thing. I could sit here and describe the whole scene, but you know what, I'll just play the clip.
All that stuff about the fighting and the suppressants. When you're having a nightmare, It's better to be able to wake up.
I didn't say it was a nightmare. Don't put words in my mouth. It was a dream of meeting a kind, warm person at the end of a long tunnel. I can't remember it clearly, but I wanted to make him happy, and
This game isn't just about death and loss, it's also about life. One of the main themes of this game is how connecting with others and establishing bonds is part of what makes life worth living. Chidori's life was never her own. The experiments and her forced awakening, getting involved with Strega, that's all she was given, that's all she ever knew. But during the game, because of her bond with Junpei and because he never gave up on her, she overcomes that. She didn't stick with the Kaya or Jin, she cared for them, but thanks to Junpei, she also started to fear death. She went against everything that Strega stood for and she gave her life for him. Chidori's persona ability, being all about bestowing life to others, is also a literal representation of that, be it to the flowers in the room or to Junpei on that fateful night. Her life was never her own. So for Chidori, after everything that she went through, after creating this bond and after freeing herself from this, for her to get this chance kind of works. And now, for the very first time, her life is her own, and she has her own reason to live.
What do you mean by that? Of course I want to live. I have to find the person in my dreams someday. I don't have time to lie in bed forever.
To find that person from her dreams. I also don't really think that this weakens Junpei's arc, as all it does is give him an extra reason to fight for the future. He's not only fighting for himself and for the people that he cares about, but he's also fighting for that future with Chidori. He's fighting with the power that she gave him, so he can ultimately reconnect with her. It also shows his character progression, as he doesn't just try to recapture his love with her as soon as possible, or he doesn't try to continue their relationship like nothing happened. Instead, he's just happy with this miracle that she's alive, and he will take this time to reconnect with her properly. As a side note, for those who care, we don't know what the canon outcome is, but just the fact that Chidori's revival is included in this, Portable, both routes by the way, and now Reload, honestly just makes me think like the writers really like the plot point of her being alive, especially because they really push you to buy the flowers in this game. Plus, compare this to Shinjiro's revival, which was only part of Portable, and even then it's only part in the female route, which is like half of the game. It is very understandable why this Chidori plot point is so controversial though. The whole game is about the meaning of life and death, and it also explores themes of dying for the sake of others. Personally, I'm also a bit double on it, as I said, because I like both outcomes. I can see a beautiful meaning and a beautiful message behind both of these stories. So I'm glad that both outcomes are here, but I'm also glad that it's optional. I'm really happy that they didn't canonize her being alive, but they also didn't canonize her being dead, which gives you both options, and I guess that just makes everyone happy. Besides her Twitter, because Twitter is never happy. Forget the fact that I'm also on Twitter. Moving on from Strega and Chidori though, another character that got expanded upon is Ryoji. Reload didn't give him as much of a focus as Portable did, as they didn't give him his own social link, but while his link was interesting in Portable, I do like how his character was handled here. His role in the story is extremely vital, but it's also really short-lived and extremely focused. So giving him an entire social link and hours of extra content does kind of dilutes this focus. His few extra scenes in Reload, on the other hand, are straight to the point, as they add to his character and his relationships, and most importantly, the mystery surrounding him. During his scenes, you often discuss the meaning of many things, what it means to establish bonds, and why should we even care if we're all gonna die anyway? Why do we care if people remember us or not? Why bother? But throughout these new events, he also makes it clear that he does care about the protagonist and that he wants to grow closer to him, which Aigis is not a fan of, by the way. But after some weeks, it becomes clear why Aigis doesn't like this guy. It's not because he's stealing away her boyfriend, I mean, that's part of it, but it's not just that, as it's revealed that Ryoji is the appraiser of death, and the fact that he is here means that the fall, or the end of all life, is coming. But while Ryoji has zero obligation to care, thanks to the time that he spent with everyone, thanks to the time that he spent with the protagonist, he feels guilty about this. He is genuinely sad that his existence leads to the fall and that it leads to the death of all of these people that he has grown to care about. He even begs Cease to kill him, as that would erase their memories and that way they wouldn't have to suffer. And this is where the music box comes into play. This is an item that Ryoji bought on the Kyoto trip, and he gives it to the protagonist as a parting gift. The protagonist means a lot to Ryoji, he even wants to be more than friends. So he gives him this in the hopes that he'll remember him. This is also the only item from a specific character that the protagonist displays in his room, by the way. His other memorabilia are all from group hangouts, which shows that he does really care for Ryoji, regardless of his role as the appraiser. I think that Ryoji is a very intriguing character, and while he always served his purpose in any version of Persona 3 quite well, I really appreciate the extra segments that Reload gave us. His additional scenes and this music box really cement his presence even further, even if it was short-lived. But with that, I basically talked about all the specific characters that this remake puts an extra focus on. But that's of course not all they did. Being a Persona game outside of our main cast, there's of course also a wide range of social links. And while Reload didn't really directly change these social links, they added one single element that greatly improved on all of them. One simple thing. Voice acting. I say simple, but I'm aware that voicing all of these links is far from simple. But if we're being honest, it is so worth it. I'm not kidding when I say that having every social link voiced made for such a massive improvement in the overall experience. And for the future of Persona, with Persona 6 or I don't know, a Persona 4 remake or something, they need to keep this going. I never thought that this improvement would carry this much weight, as I never really saw it as an issue that they weren't voiced, but god damn. Some of these links were always beloved, but the voice acting brought them even further. As soon as Atlus announced that they would be voicing them, Akinari was the first one that came to mind with many people, as his social link is one of the best, and Lucien Dodge did not disappoint with his performance. Same with Jeff Burke voicing Bebe. I always loved his social link, and I absolutely adore what they did with his French accent. It's perfect. But then there are also some other links that nobody really cared about before. Like, I don't think I ever heard anyone talk about Yuko. I don't think people hated her, but it's just that nobody really cared about her. But now with Reload, she's one of the most talked about links, and that's all because of the incredible work that Shelby Young did voicing her. Even on the complete opposite side of the spectrum with the Gourmet King. A lot of people really dislike his social link, but hearing him voiced did elevate it, as Paul Castro Jr., also known as Rindo from one of the best games ever made, Neo The World Ends With You, did a great job voicing him. I could go on and mention every single social link in their voice actor, but I feel like you get the point. These voice actors all did a phenomenal job at voicing their characters, and it was just really awesome to reconnect with these characters in this way. And as a side note, while I'm talking about social links, and specifically social link characters that might not be the most likable individuals, Persona 3 often gets a lot of flack for these links. I see it happen pretty regularly that people would say that, outside of a few highlights, Persona 3 has the worst cast of social link characters. And I don't really see that. A lot of them might not be likable characters, but that doesn't mean that their social links are bad. Like, yeah, the Gourmet King definitely isn't the best link in the series, and I definitely wouldn't want to hang out with him IRL, but this link deals with a lot of themes that are very much relevant to Persona 3. He's struggling to deal with the death of his brother, and people keep telling him that he should have been the one to die instead, which pushes him down the wrong path until he meets the protagonist, which slowly makes him realize that he doesn't have to live in his brother's shadow, that it's okay for him to live and that he can be who he wants to be. This social link in specific might get a bit messy at times, as it's also dealing with the cult and it's kind of juggling a lot of things at once, and again, he's not the most likable guy, but the message is there. All of these links, even the ones that might not have the most likable characters, all reflect the same thematic relevance, and that honestly makes me appreciate these links as well. I feel like people often think, oh, I don't like this guy, so that must mean his social link is bad. But no, sometimes you're not supposed to like this character, and that's the point. The fact that you don't like him only makes the link better in those cases. I also see people saying that it's really boring how a lot of the social links are just your classmates, but you're a high schooler, so of course you're gonna be mostly hanging out with your classmates or the people from your club. I think that kinda makes sense, and it works in the high school setting of Persona. It feels a lot more grounded. Like, yeah, some of these guys might be weirdos like Kenji, but you know, I feel like every school has a Kenji. Now, of course, I'm not saying that every single social link in Persona 3 is a 10 out of 10, can't criticize it, peak fiction. I'm just saying that some of these kind of get unwarranted hate, and I kind of just wanted to talk about that as a little side note. But moving on from that, voice acting is not the only thing that they added to social links, as they also fixed a major issue that I always had with every version of Persona 3, because romances are now finally optional. In the original Persona 3, in Fest, and in the mail route for Portable, you were always forced into a relationship with basically every single female character. With a few exceptions, of course. As soon as you'd hit a certain rank, a special relationship would form, with or without your consent, and you would never know when this would trigger since it differs between characters. And this was just very annoying for many reasons. As a role-playing game, it just sucks that you're not given a choice, and that it doesn't really make sense that your character is physically unable to form platonic relationships. On top of that, Persona 3 also had this mechanic called the reversible social links, which means that as long as you didn't max out your link, you could get into a fight with these characters and their links would reverse as a result of that. This would happen if you, for example, used a wrong dialogue option, or if you cheated on them romantically, which tends to happen if you're literally not given a choice. I'm looking at you, Yuko. Why the fuck did you reverse on me on my first playthrough when you were on rank 4? All I did was hang out with Fuka, like, why? You don't own me? We literally met up like 4 times. As you can see, this system did not leave the best impression on me. And that is also the reason why I never got very far into Yuko's social link. Or even Yukari's. Or Mitsuru's. Or even Aegis's. This made it extremely discouraging to hang out with female social links, as there was always a chance that they would just reverse on you or that others would just reverse on you, even if you're not even trying to pursue a romantic relationship. I guess you can avoid it if you use a guide, but even then you'd have to be playing the game like, oh, okay, according to the guide, I should stop doing Yuko social link now, I guess, and I wanted to continue with Yukari because I was really enjoying her plotline, but I don't know if I want to dedicate to romancing her yet, so I guess I'll put it on hold. Where's the fun in that? It just makes interacting with all of these social links needlessly annoying. Plus, it also just makes the protagonist look like a dick because apparently he just can't establish platonic relationships. So, coming back to Reload, making these romances optional is genuinely a fantastic quality of life change that's game-changing in my opinion. And the new friendship endings that they added are also genuinely really good character moments. It doesn't feel like this is just an alternative ending that's tacked on. They really made them just as impactful as the romance endings. And while I love a lot of these, like Mitsuru's friendship ending where you promise to one day go on a trip together on the motorcycle, I'm not gonna be talking about every single one of them, because then we'd be here forever. But I do want to highlight one in specific, Aegis, because she's definitely one of the more popular romances in Persona 3 for obvious reasons. So most people probably just caught her romance ending, but her friendship route is just as beautiful. You take a picture together as she wasn't able to be there last time when everyone took that group photo, and then she goes on to say that,
No matter how clear our photos and records are, they can't preserve our feelings. Data and memories aren't the same thing. Emotions can't be captured by a photograph. They can only continue to exist in our memories. But we'll all have to say goodbye eventually. And someday, our memories will fade. But I'm different. I'm going to keep my memories of everyone alive. Your experiences and feelings will continue to live on inside of me. I will never forget. Even if you all change, or if time ends up pulling us apart.
which really fucking hits. In a new alternative ending to a social link that most people will probably miss, since the game really pushes the Aegis romance, plus you unlock her in like the final month of the game. This to me is genuinely one of my favorite things that Reload does. It's an obvious change, but they put so much love and care into it that you can especially appreciate if you had issues with the annoying auto-romance in the originals. But another thing that I do really appreciate about the optional romances being introduced, albeit something smaller, is that the early romance triggers for some social links are still there, meaning that you can actually steer some of the social links in a romantic direction before actually entering a relationship. Or you can do the opposite and set up the social link for a platonic ending. It's something small, only a few lines of dialogue change, and depending on the character they will still confess to you. But it is just really cool since romances in Persona games are kind of nothing. Like, yeah, you can romance them, but outside of the final social link rank or the date events, it's never really addressed or it doesn't really carry any weight. Which is honestly a shame, because while I don't need Persona to turn into a full-on dating sim, it would be kind of cool to have social interactions like this impact your playthrough a little bit more. And I do think that the cheating reversible social links was a step in the right direction for that. If the player chooses to cheat on their partner, it's cool that there's a possible punishment awaiting them. But that's only cool when you choose to do that. The way that it's done in FES was just annoying. But thankfully, Reload does actually bring these reversible links back. They're not implemented in the same way though, instead all of the reversals are now tied to dialogue options. I guess that's their way to make this mechanic less intrusive without completely removing it. I do think that it would have been cool to keep the reversals if you cheat on someone romantically. Romances are optional now, so this is a missed opportunity to add some more depth in my opinion, but I'm glad that the system in general is just still there, as it's better than just completely removing the reversible links. And now that the system is back for Reload after being removed in Persona 5, I really hope that it sticks around for the future where they can possibly expand on it again. I think that's all I wanted to say about the social links though. There might be some tweaks to specific dialogue lines here and there, but they mostly stick to the original script. As far as I noticed at least. They did make them a bit more accessible, like Mitsuru is now available during the exam week and other stuff like that, which does make maxing them a bit more doable, but it is still really hard to be fair, since I did all of the social links and link episodes on my New Game Plus run, and I only managed to finish them with like a week or so left, which is good, because maxing all of them should be a challenge in my opinion. It's part of the fun. In the original, it wasn't even supposed to be possible to max them all in one playthrough, with the developers being surprised when people actually managed to do it, so I'm glad that they kept that spirit. But that's how Reload handles its characters, from main characters getting link episodes or just being expanded upon in general, to romances being optional and everything being voiced. And since Persona is so character-focused, it cannot be understated how much this increases the impact of just the general experience, and how much these changes are just as much additions to the narrative as they are to the characters. Especially those link episodes, which is also why I spend so much time talking about all of this stuff, because these character interactions are literally why I'm here. Now though, I guess it's time to talk about the narrative itself and how Reload chooses to present it, as many scenes are presented quite differently even if they are showing the same story beats. This is both thanks to the completely remade anime cutscenes, now animated by Studio Wit, and thanks to the new 3D CGI cutscenes. And judging by all of the online discourse around this, whether or not this is an improvement is very much a preference, but also a case-by-case thing. The anime cutscenes of the original Persona 3 were extremely unique. They ooze a lot of style and personality that establish the visual identity of the original Persona 3 and FES. Not Portable though, because if we're talking narrative presentation, Portable isn't even in the running, since it just uses screenshots. But Reload uses a bit more of a generic anime look, which isn't bad, as these scenes still look really nice, but it is still a bit sad to see because it loses a small part of the individuality that Persona 3 had. I have seen some people call this the Persona 5ification of Persona 3, or saying that Atlus is absolutely cooked now because they're making all of their games look like Persona 5, and I think that's kinda dumb. Reload just looks like what a lot of animes look like nowadays. That doesn't make it Persona 5. And even then, even if it's a different style compared to the original, and I can see why you would prefer that style, I feel like you still can't deny that these new scenes look visually really solid. Outside of that, they also chose to replace many of the 2D anime cutscenes from the original with 3D CGI cutscenes. Before release, I wasn't too sure what to think of this, but they definitely won me over. Many of the most impactful moments in this game were done in 3D, and I feel like you can't argue about these looking anything less than incredible. Just look at them. The lighting in the 3D models portray the emotions and the mood of each scene perfectly, and considering how often the game uses them, I'm glad that that's the case, because it feels like 9 out of 10 second cutscenes or something were in 3D. But of course, as I have been saying, since one style is early 2000s 2D animation and the other one is modern 3D CGI animation, you are gonna prefer one style over the other. But I wouldn't call it a downgrade, in most cases. Because as I said, it is very much a case-by-case thing. In The Awakening, for example, I do prefer the original style. There's just something about the way that Fest does it, the snappy editing, the close-ups, the audio design, the art style, the way that Thanatos bursts out of Orpheus, how there's barely any dialogue. I don't know, there's something about that version that hasn't been topped.
Persona.
But I also really like how Reload showcases it as well. The way that it's framed, there were some extremely cool shots in here, and Alex Lee also went above and beyond with the protagonist's scream. I might prefer the original, but that doesn't mean that Reload is bad, or that doesn't even mean that it's a downgrade. It's just different. But the opening scene, however, kind of is a downgrade in my opinion. In Fest, when we start a new game, we get greeted by a pretty lengthy animated cutscene, which makes brilliant use of the music, as the build-up of Burn My Dread is synced with how the scene is edited. We're constantly switching perspectives here, from the protagonist who is on his way to the train station, to Yukari who is struggling to use her evoker in her room, which is quite shocking imagery as an opening, but it also serves as a nice piece of foreshadowing. In the shots of the protagonist, you mostly hear the music as he is hearing it through his headphones, with the background noises of the city being drowned out. But in Yukari shots, it's the opposite. There's water running in her room, which just keeps getting louder to the point that it sounds like a static. The music keeps building, the editing keeps getting faster, there are a lot of close-ups. Not a word is being spoken, but the atmosphere is extremely tense and it tells you everything that you need to know. It sets the stage and the mood for the entire game, basically. But then Yukari drops the gun, the chorus starts, the tension has been broken and the protagonist has boarded his train. The scene then continues as he arrives at the dorm where Pharos greets him. We sign the contract and the dark hour comes to an end. And in Reload, this scene is portrayed very differently, as the editing is, and I hate to say this, but it's a lot more generic. First, we follow the protagonist on his way to the station, but we're not jumping between him and Yukari in the pace of the music. The focus stays on him until he reaches the station. Then we do switch to Yukari and her scene also just plays out in one go. The music isn't front and center, it doesn't really drown out the noises of the city, neither is there a static. Instead, Yukari is talking to herself in an attempt to calm down, I guess. She's kind of just narrating what she's doing. It's still quite shocking imagery, but her talking does remove a lot of the tension in my opinion. Then she of course proceeds to drop her gun and we switch back to the protagonist. But when he arrives, the cutscene actually ends as we take control of him and we walk to the dorm ourselves. Upon arrival, the protagonist enters and the camera pans up. We get our title screen, in what is honestly a really nice looking shot. The game stays in engine though, as we head inside, meet Pharos, sign our contract, and the dark hour passes. Now, don't get me wrong, I did say that Reload's version was more generic, but that doesn't mean that I dislike it. Is it a downgrade? Yeah, for me it is, especially that part with Yukari or with Pharaoh's disappearing into the darkness. That is without question just worse in my opinion. But I do like both of these versions. Visually, the Reload version looks really nice, especially that title screen, and I really love that you control the protagonist as soon as he gets off the train. Because even if you are controlling him, the atmosphere is still intact. This is also your very first introduction to this town, the place that you'll be spending many hours in. So actually getting to walk around yourself does add to it. Now it's not only the protagonist's introduction to this location, but also yours. So with both of these scenes that I mentioned, I do like both iterations, even if I kind of prefer the original. But that doesn't mean that that's the case with every scene, because there are many examples where I prefer Reload. The battle on the bridge, for example, is one of the highlights of the narrative. It's where so many mysteries are revealed, where Aigis and Ryoji have their fateful encounter, and it looks stunning. I talked about Shinjiro's death earlier as well, and while that one looks very different, now being a 3D cutscene, I do prefer this rendition by far, as there are some absolutely beautiful shots here. So, as you can see, both presentation styles have their benefits. The game does make some different decisions, like switching to 3D cutscenes or giving the player control, or simply having a different art style, but it still serves a purpose, and the end results are pretty damn good looking. And this goes without saying, but in any of the scenes the voice work is immaculate, the vibes are portrayed perfectly, they have really interesting framing, and the narrative beats and the themes are as strong as ever. You spend even more time with these characters in Reload, so when it all comes together in those moments, it already hits harder than before, and the visual presentation only helps with that. Of course, it's not the same as a 20-year-old game, but most importantly, it is still Persona 3. It tells the same story and it portrays the same message, it delivers the same emotional beats, but while doing that, it sets itself apart from a FES or a Portable. It's still Persona 3, but it creates its own identity within that. It creates its identity as Persona 3 Reload. But while I'm on this topic, I can't not mention the one sequence of events that utilizes this new style of presentation in the best way possible. It's probably the most iconic sequence from this entire game. I'm of course talking about the ending. And Reload presents not only the ending, but the entire final month quite differently compared to any other iteration. This is also just one of my favorite parts of the game in general, so I do just want to talk about this for a bit. Both about why I love this part of the game in general, but also why I really appreciate how Reload presents it. On the 1st of January, right after you decide to spare Ryoji, the countdown starts to your fight with Nyx, the immortal being that will bring about the fall and end all of life on Earth. Nyx is really set up to be this all-powerful being, you basically don't stand a chance. Not only that, but the game as a whole has really been building this feeling of hopelessness. In the first few months of the game, we're making relatively smooth progress, like we're figuring out how the shadows operate, we find out the full moon thing, we get new members joining our team, but then we get hit with Shinjiro's death. The betrayal of Ikutsuki, the death of Mitsuru's father, the whole Chidori situation happens. Our characters are at their lowest when this month comes around. All the while, the apathy syndrome is on the rise, and it's humanity who unconsciously wished for the fall to happen. But we still decide to face this threat head on. You could have just killed Ryoji and forgotten everything, accepting your death in a peaceful way. There's even a special cutscene for this, by the way. It's kind of harrowing as the time skips to the final day, and you just see our main characters completely oblivious of what they've been through, hanging out and doing everyday things. The colors are muted and you see Junpei, Yukari and the protagonist at a karaoke bar, only for it to fade to black as the fall has arrived. It's similar to the royal bad ending, where it looks pretty nice and peaceful out of context, but within context, it's extremely messed up, especially when you remember that. While the rest of the cast might have forgotten, Aige still remembers everything. It's really cool that this got a cutscene though. I guess it's pretty normal, because like, all of the Persona bad endings get a cutscene, but I never actually did this one, so I never found out about this cutscene existing until I was making this video, so I thought I'd just throw it in here. But of course, just accepting death isn't the real ending. As the game has shown us many times throughout its story, despite all the hardships, life is worth fighting for, no matter how hopeless it may seem, so you continue on living in determination. And this is is the mood for the final month of the game. The characters are doing everything that they can, but at the same time, they realize that there's not much they can do, as the battle with Nyx draws closer at every waking moment. And this is also emphasized in Reload, as the dorm completely shifts in color palette. Where the dorm used to be bright and colorful, maybe even a bit too much so, during the month of January all the colors have been drained out of it. But not all hope is lost, as the background music also shifts. Instead of Lotus Juice rapping about how he's chilling in his bed, the song that's now playing is called Living with Determination, which is in stark contrast with the rest of Tatsumi Port Island, because outside of the dorm, while exploring the city, the music has shifted to Memories of the City. As you walk around, you see the whole town full of papers and posters advertising the cult, praying for the fall to happen. People with the apathy syndrome are everywhere. The town is chaotic, but it also feels like all life has already left this place. It's also no coincidence that this track is called Memories of the City. It's the final month of the game, and as everything moves towards the inevitable end, you're left with this feeling of reflection as you're thinking back on all the memories that you made here. Seeing the city like this, the place that you spent hours upon hours walking around in, it makes you reflect on the narrative of the past few months. Did you really make all the right decisions? Is there anything that could have been done differently? Of course, this music shift is in every version of Persona 3, but Reload added the muted colors, and the fact that the city felt so much more alive in Reload makes this final month stand out even more, and it makes the feeling of hopelessness stronger than ever. But outside of making you reflect from a narrative standpoint, it also makes you reflect on the gameplay decisions that you've made. In the evening time slots, there isn't much left to do. You probably finished most of the content by now, so just like the characters, you're just kind of waiting for the inevitable end, which is quite striking. But during the day, you don't have that much time left to complete the social links. On the first playthrough, you most likely won't be able to complete all of them, so did you focus on the right ones? On the last day, maybe you'll find out that you'll be missing the end of Mitsuru's social link because that one day you randomly decided to hang out with Kenji instead. Or maybe it's the opposite and you'll actually consider hanging out with Kenji for once instead of just running past him to leave the classroom every day. He's also gonna be a victim of the fall, so maybe he deserves a friend for these last few days. Okay, who am I kidding? Those thoughts might cross your mind as you're reflecting on the time you spent playing this game, but I guess a social link also becomes available in the final month. And after school, every single day, she is standing right next to you, staring into the depths of your soul. I guess they just really didn't want you to miss her link, huh? Especially because in the first few episodes, they even bait you into believing that this social link is about finding a missing cat. But before you know it, they hit you with an existential crisis, as this game tends to do. And you know what? If you're gonna bait me into that, I guess a cat does work. Especially because it is, again, thematically pretty relevant, strangely enough. In this social link, she tries to understand what reason life even has to exist. Why we were here making bonds and making friends just to be separated in the end, which is extremely similar to what Ryoji was saying, but where in the end Ryoji offered us a way to escape this pain, a way to escape life, a way to forget and to end our life without suffering. Ultimately, Aigis learns about the importance of establishing relationships, which gives her the determination to keep on fighting and to keep our memories alive. Then, after you hang out with her for the day, you enter the dorm. Living with Determination starts playing. You enter the final block of Tartarus, and this block is visually stunning. Every other block always looked disturbing, hostile, or just fucking weird, but now it's bright, beautiful, and ethereal, while still feeling melancholic, with the final Tartarus remix reflecting that feeling of determination, giving you the feeling that you still have to try and fight Nyx no matter what to protect those you hold dear. And in a world where everyone has lost hope, you are still fighting, doing the only thing that you can, climbing this seemingly endless tower. But what I also really appreciate is that during this month, there are still those moments of levity, because on one of the final days you decide to walk Koromaru with everyone. It's a simple scene, just our cast hanging out in the park at the shrine, but seeing everyone together here does serve as a reminder of what you're trying to protect, which then brings us to the ending itself. There's one really unfortunate thing though, and while I will go into detail later as I talk about the gameplay, I feel like I have to mention it here now as well, and that is that the Nyx battle, the final boss, is way too easy. And after a whole month of everyone just constantly saying, "What the fuck guys, we're so cooked," it is extremely disappointing that you can basically make it through this fight no problem. I get that they wanted to nerf it in comparison to Fest because the fight there was extremely hard, you could even say annoyingly so, as I know a friend who was stuck on that fight for years. But in Portable, it honestly felt fine to me, so I don't know why they nerfed it into the ground even more. That being said though, the difficulty in general is a bit of a weird one in Reload, but again, I'll talk about it later. Difficulty aside though, the final bosses in Reload are still incredible, and while talking about the final month, I can't not mention them. You have your final face-off against Strega, first fighting Jin, who's been trying to stop you from reaching Takaya, again showing you his resolve to help him reach his goal, and after defeating him you also get confirmation to his past. Earlier they only hinted at the origin of Strega, but now it is confirmed without a doubt that they are the result of the Kirijo group's experiments. But he holds no grudge for them, he simply wants Takaya to fulfill his wish, as he gave them a reason to live. As I said earlier when I talked about Strega, Jin isn't the most standout character in this game, but he doesn't have to be. He's an embodiment of what Strega stands for, and in scenes like this he fulfills that role perfectly. And afterwards you of course confront Takaya, which isn't only a really solid boss fight, but the conversation that you have before and after the fight is also really good, as it perfectly encapsulates the opposing mindsets of Strega and Cease. But while there is some truth in what he's saying, that doesn't justify his actions, and as he is the only thing standing between us and Nyx, of course we have to deal with him. And so we reach the top of Tartarus and we face off against Nyx, or the Nyx avatar I should say, which is probably one of my favorite final bosses in any game ever. Not only does it have an awesome design, it really stuck with me ever since first seeing him when playing Fez, and not only are you fighting Ryoji, but there is so much importance and meaning behind this fight. This is what the game has been building towards. Nyx is the embodiment of everything that Cease is fighting against, nihilism or seeking salvation in death. The exact themes that the game has been exploring over its pretty lengthy runtime. And with everything that you've been through, you're now finally ready to fight this impossible battle, just to have a chance of survival, to carry on the wishes of your friends that you lost along the way, to keep on living against all the odds. That, in and of itself, is already quite a strong setup for a final battle. It just meets all of the requirements that you'd expect from a final boss from a JRPG. It has really cool design, it's thematically relevant, and of course it's a god that you basically don't stand a chance against. But on top of that, Nyx doesn't only have 1 or 2 phases, but it has 14 of them, 1 for each major arcana, starting at the pool all the way until it reaches its true form in the Death Arcana.
The arcana is the means by which all is revealed.
Throughout the fight, as Nyx is switching between these arcana, it will comment on the meaning of each card. This is also what we've been exploring throughout the game thanks to the social links, with each of their stories exploring a certain character and their place in this world, each representing their respective arcana and seeing how they all find their own meaning in it. But then, as the final phase comes around, Nyx poses their own answer to all of these experiences.
Entrusting his future to the cards, man clings to a dim hope. Yet the arcana is the means by which all is revealed. Beyond the journey you have taken lies the absolute end. It matters not who you are. One thing is always certain. Death awaits all.
According to Nyx, there is no meaning to life. What's the point if we're all gonna die anyway? But the protagonist, of course, goes against this. After signing his contract in the beginning of the game, he started to live his life to the fullest. He makes genuine connections with his social links and he helps his friends through death and loss. all the while suffering these things himself over the course of the story. And unlike Nyx, despite our struggles, we find the answer ourselves and we find a purpose in life. And all of this then culminates in this final battle. And so, we make the impossible possible. We defeat the Nyx avatar, and the protagonist, as he has now found the answer to life, has found the power within himself to seal Nyx away, sacrificing himself to become the Great Seal. I can't put into words how much I adore this entire sequence. But while we might have defeated the final boss, the game isn't over just yet. Because after this battle we have a small time skip to March. We get to say our goodbyes to everyone that we met on our journey, and there are quite a few tearjerkers in there. But after that, we reach the promised day. And to talk about the ending itself then, as most things in Persona 3 Reload, it is extremely faithful of an adaptation. In the beginning of the scene, it's actually surprisingly faithful, even down to when it goes from anime cutscenes to in-engine or 3D cutscenes. But where in the opening scene I preferred the version of the original, I actually prefer the Reload version by a lot here. Like, yeah, the criticism of the art style that I mentioned earlier definitely still applies here, but I just like how this is all framed and how this is all shown a lot more. There's a lot more life and movement, and it's just nicer to look at in my opinion. The only thing that has changed in these early sections of the ending is that Ken and Koromaru are now there. In the original, they weren't there for some reason until the final shot, but here they actually got added into the cutscene and into the build-up of the entire ending, which is really nice. But later in the scene, when we reach the rooftop, while it is still very faithful in the story that's being told in the dialogue, it goes in a very different direction presentation-wise. Where the original had an in-engine top-down view of the bench with Aigis and the protagonist, keeping a static shot until the very end, Reload transitions into a CGI cutscene, and it is absolutely beautiful. Not only in the way that Aigis and the protagonists are shown here, but also in the way that the environment is shown with the cherry blossoms. Every now and then cutting to the rest of the characters making their way up to the roof, and flashbacks to pivotal moments in Aigis' journey. Now, the running bit does look a bit silly, but it is also really wholesome, so I'll leave that aside. In the original game, the ending was very simplistic and minimalistic. As I said, they basically kept the static shot for the whole thing. But here, it feels like the developers knew how much of a big deal this moment was, so they went all out with it. But while I do really appreciate how simple the original keeps it, I don't think Reload went too far either. It gives you more time to see everyone's reaction when they remember and when they reach the roof. They give you more time to be with Aigis and the protagonist as they share this moment. After going through this entire game, after going through the hardships of the final few months and the final month of reflection and determination, after seeing the story of Aigis and her social link, this moment is where everything comes together. Aigis, who learned the importance of relationships, a robot who learned to be human. She is here swearing that she will protect the protagonist forever, and that she will keep his memory alive. And the protagonist, in this moment, he finally fulfills the promise that he made to his friends. He found the answer to life as he closes his eyes and leaves this world behind. He's finally able to rest, to become the Great Seal that will keep Nyx away, that will keep the fall from ever happening again, to protect his friends and all life on Earth. The voice acting, the presentation and visuals, the music, the meaning behind it all, it was perfect. While I can fully understand if people say that they prefer the more simplistic way of portraying it from the originals, to me this is the best portrayal of the ending by far, and I didn't expect it to be. As the ending of Persona 3 was always a very special moment to me, I was honestly scared to reach the ending in Reload because what if they don't do it justice? But to see it like this, to see it be adapted with so much passion, with all the hard-hitting dialogue intact, only slightly expanding on it and improving the visual presentation, I don't have anything but praise for it. It hit me hard in FES, it even hit me hard in Portable, but in Reload, man, I don't think I've ever gotten this emotional over any piece of media. And this kind of circles us back to the start. Reload respects the original Persona 3. It's an extremely faithful recreation. You're here to experience Persona 3. You're here to experience the moments that made this game iconic, and to experience the emotions that made everyone fall in love with this game. And you will. But it's not just that, because the experience was enhanced and improved upon in so many ways. Be it with small tweaks or with bigger additions like the Link episodes. Basically, every change or expansion felt meaningful, it felt respectful, and it was oozing with love for the original. And to me, all of these things only enhanced the narrative experience. This is already the longest script that I've ever written, and I haven't even talked about the gameplay. Oh, please end me. Before moving on to the actual dungeon gameplay though, I do want to touch on some small quote-unquote side content first, as Reload added in some new things to do, but it's done in a way that it really complements both the gameplay and the narrative, and you can't really classify it as either, so I'm just gonna have its own little section in between the two right here, because a lot of the side content in Persona games isn't really side content, thanks to the calendar structure. You kinda just find yourself doing this stuff in between main story events. The social links are a great example of this, but I did talk about those enough already. I'm more talking about the new additions like the study sessions right now, as these complement the gameplay side of things in rewarding you with social stats, but they also complement the main story as you once again get to spend more time with your party members, which is something that I really liked, especially considering that a lot of the C social links only unlock relatively late into the game, so getting to spend more time with them by studying together does add to their characterization throughout the whole game. Being able to study together also shakes up this monotonous exam period, because usually you're just grinding in the library, using the public PC, or eating fish, which apparently makes you smarter, but that's kind of it. No dialogue, no social links to hang out with, no nothing, just lock in and grind. But now you can study together with your party members, which is just a lot more fun since you're getting to spend more time with them. Something similar that they included in Reload, which isn't exactly new, but I really like them, so I'm gonna mention them anyway, are the Koromaru walks. I like that these give you random items and that you can run into random social links to get points with them, but sometimes a random dorm member would also join you on these walks and reflect on a recent story event, which was especially nice on replays. On my first playthrough, I barely did any of these walks, I'm sorry Koromaru, because I was leveling my social stats and stuff, but on my New Game Plus run I actually did a lot of these, and it was really nice to take a walk with Aigis or Yukari after a story event happened and to see them reflect on it. Even if it was just a few lines of dialogue, it's again that feeling of you connecting with them as you're spending so much time together. A thing that is completely new in Reload though are the evening hangouts, and they once again add so much to the game in my opinion. Every party member has 2 different activities that they can partake in, and once you partake in a specific activity enough times you unlock a new combat perk called a personality trait. I really like these since they're just genuinely good hangouts with that character. They're not as deep as social links or Link episodes, but they're actually quite substantial and you do get to know all of them a bit better as you're spending more time with them doing everyday things like tending the plants, cooking, or reading a book together. And on top of that, these combat personality traits are actually kind of insane. Like for Junpei, they increase his critical hit rate up to the point that he basically crits every other turn, and for Yukari, they decrease the cost of her healing skills, stuff like that. And if you decide to cook together or work in the garden, you actually get some items as well. You can also tend to the garden on your own, but if you do it with a party member, you get a bigger harvest, which means that you have more items, which then means that you don't have to go to Tartarus as often because you can get your SP back a lot easier so you can make more progress in one night. Again, it might seem like something small, but it's so meaningful and it creates a ripple effect. Having more things to do at night, growing closer to your party members, getting extra skills and items out of it as well, it all strengthens that unique aspect of Persona 3 of living in a dorm. You're constantly surrounded by your party members, and I like that vibe, so I'm a really big fan of the fact that they expanded upon this. Everything in this game is so intrinsically connected. You get rewarded by engaging in character interactions, and that's what Persona 3 is about, establishing these bonds. It all comes back to that core message, and it's masterfully done. But also on a more surface level, the personality traits and extra items, it's of course all there to help you on your trips to the dungeon, Tartarus. And you know what? maybe it's time to talk about that damn tower. Be it the OG, FES, or Portable, Tartarus was always the thing that people would point to when criticizing Persona 3. And even if Tartarus got a lot of changes for Reload, this point of criticism has actually stuck around for a lot of people. Everyone, from what I've seen, can definitely agree that it's an upgrade, but opinions are still pretty mixed. But that's also normal, because Tartarus as a concept is definitely not for everyone. And while Reloads did change a lot about Tartarus, that core concept of what it is still remains. Tartarus is still this massive tower with 264 floors. It's still divided into 6 blocks, and every night you have the opportunity to explore this tower, climbing up floor by floor, killing enemies, collecting treasure, fighting bosses, and trying to get as far as the story allows you at that time. And as you progress the story, of course the tower opens up more. And I'm really happy that Reload didn't change this concept, because Tartarus is Tartarus for a reason. It's this giant eldritch location which is constantly shifting its form. It's filled with mystery around the creation and the purpose of it. It's a hostile location, and it's framed like this insurmountable challenge. Will we ever reach the end, and what answers will we find there? Are there even any answers at the top, or is there even a top? The characters are questioning this constantly throughout the story. They're not sure if what they're doing even has a purpose, but they still decide to go there and to face that challenge. It's not something that they want to do, but they feel like they have to. And their reason for that also evolves and changes throughout the story as you begin to unravel the mystery behind it. At first, it's almost treated like a training ground, as Akihiko phrases it, a nest of shadows. But as these shadows are starting to appear outside of Tartarus, maybe that's where we'll find more of these things, and we need to be prepared for when the next one shows up, so going to Tartarus seems like the logical conclusion, especially since we are the only ones with this power. But later in the game, once all 12 major Arcana shadows have been defeated, a greater purpose reveals itself. Every single night, this Tower of Demise grows out of the ground as a result of the experiments from the Kirijo group. They wanted to bring about the fall, and while they did fail thanks to Yukari's father, the tower and the 12 shadows still spawned from it. It was brought into existence out of the innate human desire for death. And at the end of the game, Ryoji reveals that at the very top is where Nyx will be awaiting them. So for this tower to be this ginormous eldritch structure is extremely fitting for the narrative, but also for the core theming and the experience of Persona 3. Like, yeah, I completely understand if you think that's too long or repetitive, but that's also kind of the point of it all. The gameplay and the story are working together here to reinforce that idea and to give you the feeling that the characters have, because they're also not jumping from excitement to go there. Unless you're Akihiko, I guess, because he does seem really excited to go to Tartarus every night.
Pretty exciting, huh?
But then again, I also kind of enjoy Tartarus, to be honest. Even in FES or Portable, I didn't mind it. I appreciate what it stands for, and while it's not the most exciting thing in the world, there is kind of a fun and satisfying rhythm to it that I always enjoyed. I kind of just vibe with it, clearing floors, defeating enemies, defeating the bosses, getting treasure, all the while chilling in a voice chat with friends or having a podcast in the background, like, I don't know, the Jamcast or something. Peak podcast, link in the description. So even if Tartarus is kind of repetitive and kind of boring, like, yes, it definitely is this massive grind of 264 randomly generated floors, but that's what Tartarus is, and that's also part of why I personally like it. It's not for everyone, but it doesn't have to be. But even if I personally always enjoyed Tartarus in every version of Persona 3, the improvements that Reload made are extremely clear to anyone as soon as you first step foot into that dungeon, as the entire way that these floors are structured is completely different. Where in FES or Portable it was clearly stitched together, like the hallway square connects to the square with the treasure chests in the corner, and this square then connects to the staircase square. Here, it just felt a lot more natural, and with all of the visual enhancements and the larger variety, it was just so much nicer, even if it was still procedurally generated. Especially because the entire structure of Tartarus changes completely with every single block. In the original, the blocks are also differentiated, but there it was handled by a different color palette and some different textures, or some very small structural changes like stairs turning into slopes. But here, the blocks actually feel drastically different. Whenever whenever I finally started to feel familiar with it and started to feel comfortable, the game would completely change it up, so I had to readjust my strategy again. From the lower floors that still resemble a school with the straight and narrow hallways, to the gigantic wide and open halls of the Tia block, to whatever this block is. In the originals you also just had a light jog, but here they added a dash, so you're weaving between the enemies, doing ambushes and dashing from one breakable treasure thing to the next. The only downside to this is that it's a lot easier to avoid enemies in Reload compared to the previous versions. When I was playing faster portable, I would often be stuck on the floor, because I was at low HP and I had to try and get past this shadow, but that wasn't gonna be easy, and because of that, it did feel a lot more tense. While Reload still requires some level of skill to weave between the enemies, at least on the narrow floors, it's nowhere close to the tension of the original, so I guess it's a bit of a double-edged blade. The sense of carefully having to get past enemies got lost in translation, but despite that I can't deny that the optimized movement system, paired with the new layout, made it a lot more satisfying to make my way through this dungeon. I felt a lot more engaged as a player, where in the originals my eyes would often be glued to the minimap, here I would be looking at my surroundings more and navigating myself through the dungeon in that way, which is of course a lot better than constantly being glued to your minimap. Plus, there are also a lot of really nice visual details going on here, from the way that there's movement in everything, the special light effects, the gates and walls moving to create an opening, the messed up hallways that you can see through the cracks. Whenever I got to a new Tartarus block, it was just really cool to discover all of the little visual details that they were hiding. People would often look at Tartarus and say that it's just a shitty randomly generated dungeon, but they actually put a lot of work into making this look and play as good as it does. Just the basic act of running around in Tartarus, opening treasure chests or engaging in battles with enemies felt a lot more smooth in this game than ever before. Another thing that they added are these small conversations that your party members would have. This ties back to what I was saying in the beginning of the video, that even while exploring the dungeons, it kind of feels like you're just hanging out with these characters and growing closer to them. In the original, they also had a few lines of dialogue if you walked up to them and interacted with them, but here they'll just start yapping about random stuff like an upcoming exam or a rumor that's been making the rounds at school while exploring the dungeon. These talks are a really nice addition that adds to the vibe of the team, especially because they're usually pretty funny conversations as well. Same thing with the small talk after defeating a floor boss. Outside of this, they also went pretty far to change up the general gameplay loop a bit more, both to make it less repetitive but also just to evolve the Tartarus experience. Portable originally took the first step in this evolution by introducing the missing people, and Reload brings this mechanic back. It's not a game-changing system, but it is just a nice addition as it gives you something extra to think about while running through, and it makes it a bit less of a grind. It also helps with making these dungeon trips more important from a narrative standpoint, as it just gives them extra ties to the people living in the city, and outside of just helping out with the apathy syndrome, you're now also directly helping people out. So it is a pretty worthwhile addition in my opinion. And Reload also added missing cats, by the way. It's nothing major, but it's nice, I guess. Cats are cool, and saving cats is even cooler, so this is pretty awesome. It is genuinely cool that these cats have a unique reward for you though, as they will always give you lots of Twilight fragments for saving them, which is something else that Reload added. These Twilight fragments are basically a special currency that you can only use in Tartarus, and they once again add an extra element to your exploration of this dungeon. They're these little blue gems, and you can use them for a lot of things. Some chests, for example, will be locked and you spend Twilight fragments to open them. Another thing that they can be used for is to completely heal your party back at the entrance, refilling both your HP and your SP, and this makes for a pretty good system in my opinion, as you kind of need to think about what you want to use these fragments for. Do you want to spend them on fully healing your party, basically doubling the amount of progress that you can make in one night, or do you want to save up these fragments in order to open more chests and get more loot? It works really nicely because the amount of progress that you make in Tartarus is basically completely dependent on how much SP you have. If you run out of SP, it's probably time to leave or you won't be able to put up much of a fight. You can always use items to bring back SP, but SP items can be pretty rare and expensive, especially the good ones. So do you really want to use them now, or do you want to save them for a boss and use Twilight fragments instead? But then again, if you use these fragments, you get a lot less loot, which means less equipment. You can buy equipment in town, of course, as the local police officer will gladly sell a sword or a knife to a miner, but that's gonna cost you a lot of money. So these Twilight fragments just fit into this economy quite nicely, and they give you some extra options while also not completely breaking the system. On top of that, the game also encourages you to use these fragments, as whenever you use them, there's a chance that the Great Clock will spawn. This clock is basically used for leveling your backup characters, because in Persona 3, XP is only for the party members that are actively exploring Tartarus with you, so some party members will usually be at a higher level than others. Like if you're someone who decided to bench Junpei as soon as Mitsuru became available, he will soon be left behind, as you guys are all going up to level 40, 50 and beyond, but he's still gonna be on the bench at level 20, so this kind of forces you to choose your endgame party and to work towards that party as soon as you start the game. Unless you of course want to do an insane amount of grinding to constantly get those benched party members back up to speed, which is a pretty big downside of not having XP share. But at the same time, having to pick and choose your party members is also part of the strategy in a game like this. So Reload tries to strike a balance, which is where the clock comes into play. Whenever this clock spawns, you get to select 2 party members to catch up with you. This way, you still need to have a plan for your lineup, but it also encourages you to switch out your party members or to try out new characters as they join. As right now, you can just switch out a party member without being too worried about the XP that they're missing out on. My endgame party, for example, was Aigis for physical damage, Mitsuru for magic damage, and Yukari for support.
I see. So this is what you would call a harem, correct?
But during the month of September, my party looked drastically different, as this is the only month where Shinjiro is available, so I wanted to use the OGC's team with Shinjiro, Mitsuru, and Akihiko. And this mechanic was basically perfect for this, as it gave me a chance to hear all of their unique dialogue, but it also made it a lot easier to get Yukari and Aigis back up to the level that they were supposed to be. There is of course a limit to the amount of XP that the clock can give you per use, like you can't just bring Junpei up from level 20 to level 80 in one go, but that's also why I like it, as this means that it doesn't just completely break the game. It strikes a balance between having to strategically choose, but also having a bit more freedom. Another major addition to Reload would be the Monad doors. These can randomly spawn on any regular floor of Tartarus, and if you go inside of them, you can face a more challenging enemy. If you manage to defeat them, you get some rewards, and on top of that, clearing this challenge will also reveal the entire map of this floor. So you can easily see where all the enemies are, where all the treasure is, or if you don't care about that, you can also instantly teleport to the stairs and move on to the next floor. Clearing this challenge even maps out that next floor, so if you really want to make some progress, clearing a Monad door basically allows you to skip 2 floors. It's a pretty basic risk-reward thing. On the last floor of each block, however, there were also these special Monad passages. Instead of 1 boss, they have 3 of them, and then you of course also get more rewards. The most important of these rewards being another new addition to Reload, namely the Tarot cards, as these add a new card to your shuffle time, which can grant you buffs for the entire duration of your Tartarus visit, like extra all-out attack damage or stuff like increasing social stats for the following day, again tying together the dungeon and the daily life gameplay. They reset every single visit, and there's also a maximum amount of these that you can have activated at once, so whenever I only had 1 or 2 slots left and I saw one pop up, I didn't always instantly take them. Instead, I waited for the better cards to show up, so I could kind of choose my buffs for this specific run. It's just another thing to pay attention to, an extra layer of depth into your Tartarus trips, and I always appreciate stuff like that. Then there are also some more minor additions like the unique floors that you can run into. Some of these have bigger treasure rooms, others have a healing clock which offer you a unique situation to heal. There's also some stuff like the darker floors. These have a lot more treasure and a lot more Twilight fragments to collect, but they are a lot darker, so you're probably gonna spend some time looking for them. And of course, because you're gonna be spending more time on these floors to find all the treasure, the Reaper spawns a lot faster here. And while these special floors don't happen that often, and while they might sound like pretty small additions, they do come together to just change up the pace every now and then, which is really nice. So with all of these changes and additions combined, I do think that Reload's rendition of Tartarus is by far the best one. But that also doesn't mean that it's without its flaws, because there are some elements that I do think Reload's downgraded on. For me personally, these aren't deal-breaking or anything like that, but for a remake of Persona 3, especially As a remake of Persona 3, these are some pretty big missed potentials that should be criticized. Like how you can't split up your party members anymore to explore a floor of Tartarus more efficiently. In the original, you could literally just split up as soon as you enter the floor, and every party member would start running off in their own directions. You could even set their priorities to defeat shadows or to explore and find the stairs as soon as possible. If they find treasure, of course, they give it to you, and if they find the stairs, you can instantly teleport up to the next floor, which of course made it a lot faster to explore these floors, as you weren't the only one running around. And it was just kinda funny in the original to see them run around like idiots because their AI wasn't the best. This of course did come with a risk, as these party members could also get into battles on their own, and the chance that they made it out safely was pretty slim, so you would have to go to where the battle is taking place and join the fight midway through. It was just a neat little mechanic that I always thought was really interesting and unique, as it wouldn't work in Persona 4 or 5. It only works here because of the structure that Tartarus has. Reload didn't completely get rid of this mechanic, but they did replace it with something far inferior in my opinion, because now it randomly happens that a single party member can ask you to explore ahead. What this does is very simple. Said party member will leave and the floor that you're currently on gets mapped out partially, and when you go up the stairs, that party member will join up with you again, giving you the items that they found. I'm not saying that this is a bad mechanic, it is pretty cool, but I like the original one more, and I don't know why this one had to replace that one. It could have been cool to just have both options, but now we just have this one. And as a player, there isn't much to engage with here. And similarly to that, Reload also simplified something else, namely the protagonist's physical weapon. As in the original and in Fest, the protagonist could wield multiple weapon types. You could give him a spear or a sword or even a bow. This of course gave you a lot more options in the combat and in the party setup, but it also changed how you'd approach Tartarus exploration, as the ambushes would work very differently depending on each weapon. This mechanic was already removed in Portable. I'm not sure why, maybe it was just part of the downgrades that Portable had because it's a PSP game, or maybe it was just a trick to give the male protagonist a different playstyle from the female protagonist, but fair enough, I guess it's Portable. Portable is quite literally a demake for a portable platform, so whatever, I can leave that aside. But I would have really liked it if this came back in Reload, especially because a big focus in Reload was to add extra layers to the combat and the Tartarus exploration. So I'm a bit surprised that this feature didn't make the cut. It's nothing detrimental, but it is quite a shame. Then there's also another change that I'm honestly quite conflicted on, namely the tired or the exhaustion mechanic. To give some context, because this is a pretty important point, in every version of Persona 3, your party members would become tired after participating in too many Tartarus battles. When they're tired, the character is more likely to miss, they take more damage, etc., which basically puts a hard limit on how much you can explore in one night. And even after leaving Tartarus, your party members will still be tired for the next day or two, so you can't go to Tartarus multiple nights in a row. But there was also another part to this, because sometimes it could happen that your party members feel great instead of tired, or if the protagonist goes to bed early and sleeps as his evening activity, you would then feel great the next day, giving you a buff instead. And this just adds a lot of depth, as you really need to plan out your Tartarus trips in more detail. But on the other hand, it can also make these trips happen more spontaneously. Maybe you had planned out to hang out with a social link on that night, only to notice that one of your main DPSs is feeling great. So you gotta choose between sticking to your plan or taking advantage of this buff. From a narrative standpoint, it's also kind of perfect for Persona 3, as Tartarus isn't fun for our characters. Even while exploring, there is a lot of dialogue of Fuka telling you to go home for the night and to rest because you've been spending too much time in Tartarus. And that makes sense. It makes sense that your party members don't want to go 2 nights in a row. It makes sense that they can't run through a whole block in one night because it would simply be too exhausting. But while I did always like this idea in concept, I was never too fond of it in the gameplay. In Fest especially, it felt like my characters would get tired all the time, which forced me to constantly be leaving the dungeon and to spread out my visits over the whole month. Remember, Tartarus in Fest didn't have the missing people or the monad doors in the way that they were in Reload. It didn't have controllable party members in combat, it didn't even have a dash, it wasn't visually as interesting, and every single block was more or less the same. It was extremely repetitive, and this gave gave you a hard limit on how much you could do in one night, which then also means that you have a lot less freedom in general, and you'd have to go to Tartarus a lot more often. Don't get me wrong, I honestly do appreciate mechanics to give a stronger connection between the gameplay and the narrative. I can even appreciate mechanics that are made to be a hindrance, made to be an annoyance, and made to be quote-unquote less fun. But there is still a line to be drawn. Fest wasn't horrible, far from it even, but Tartarus in that game wasn't that much fun, and this took a lot of freedom away from the player, and it just made everything a tiny bit too restrictive. So in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, I guess it's fair to say that it was a tiny bit much, which is probably why Portable downscaled it. But maybe they downscaled it a bit too much, because in Portable your party members would never get tired during visits. It was only once you left that they got tired for the next day, making it so that you could just ignore the whole system. And I always just did my Tartarus runs in one night anyway. The only thing that I really had to keep in mind was to make sure that the main character was feeling great when I would go into Tartarus, but that was literally it. The mechanic was there, but that was it. It didn't leave that much of an impact on your playthrough, if any. It kind of felt like Portable wanted to get rid of it, but instead they didn't commit and they just downscaled it to the point that you basically just forget that it's there. So they never quite nailed this exhaustion mechanic. Which is why Reload finally gave them the opportunity to realize their vision without restricting the player too much, especially because we have things like the XP clock now, which could help with the annoyance of a tired party member, as you could just switch them out a lot easier. And Tartarus is just a lot more fun to play through in general, there's a lot more variety. But instead, they committed where Portable didn't, and they just got rid of this mechanic. But this is then where I'm so conflicted. Because while I won't deny that this is a missed potential, if I'm being honest, I didn't really miss this mechanic while playing the game. Where Fest barely had anything to do at night outside of going to Tartarus, Reload added the dorm hangout. Some of the Link episodes take place at night and you have access to a lot more locations. So it would just be annoying if you have to visit Tartarus like 10 times a month or something, because there's just so much else to do. So while this mechanic is a really cool concept, as a concept, it's also inherently restricting. It feels like it's a mechanic that was made with the fact in mind that there isn't really anything to do at night, so naturally they're gonna be pushing you towards the dungeon more. And now that there's more to do in the daily life gameplay, they had to do some rebalancing. So this is where I'm conflicted. I'm not a game dev. Before release, I had no idea how they could expand on each male party member like Portable did without having to cut social links or without having too many social links. So there probably is a way to do it, but then again, would that way have been worth it? Would Reload really be a better game if it had the tired mechanic? It would have definitely sacrificed a lot of the new aspects of the live sim gameplay that, again, I really enjoyed. And at the same time, I also feel like the way that SP management is done serves the exact same purpose, because at its core, the exhaustion system was there to pace your Tartarus visits, which is exactly what your SP does. But while the tired mechanic does work better narratively, it is kind of a hard limit, while the SP system is a lot more dynamic, as you can always extend your trips by using items or the new Twilight fragments. This is probably the only thing from the game that I'm genuinely just conflicted on. With most things I can confidently say, yes, I like this is better, or no, this is worse, the original did it better. Because on one hand, I would have really loved for Reloads to include it, because again, it is so perfect for Persona 3. It fits within the themes of the narrative and the characters and this world, but while it was such a good concept, they never quite perfected the execution of it, and I am extremely happy with the gameplay loop that Reload provides. Maybe a reworked tired mechanic would have just made it worse, but maybe it would have also made it better if they did find that sweet spot. I honestly just have no idea. What definitely doesn't help with this though is the fact that this game is surprisingly easy. I think that if this game was more challenging and it was harder to avoid enemies, or if the combat was harder, you would have used more SP items and it would have then been more punishing and you'd have to strategize a lot more. Maybe then I wouldn't be as conflicted on this, as the tired mechanic could have brought that layer of difficulty back, which I'm kind of missing right now. But I feel like I'm starting to ramble on this point, so I'm just gonna move on. Hopefully I was able to bring my point across as to why I am so conflicted on this, but now that I mentioned the difficulty, why did they make this game so easy? I know that people don't necessarily come to Persona for challenging gameplay, it's not an SMT game, I mean, it is, but like, you know what I mean, it's not an SMT game in that way. A lot of people play Persona to focus on the day-to-day gameplay or the story and the characters, which is completely fine. The game has a lot of difficulty settings. There's peaceful, easy, normal, hard, and merciless, so everyone should be able to find the difficulty that they like. In theory, at least. Personally, I was looking for a challenge, so I thought I'll just start on the hardest difficulty setting, and if it's too hard, I'll turn it down until I find a difficulty that I enjoy. But at first, everything was honestly fine. I was really enjoying Merciless. I'm kind of proud of myself for that one even. But during the second block or so, everything started to slowly get more and more grindy. I was just getting stuck on this one gatekeeper boss after already running through this entire Tartarus block twice to grind XP, and as this went on, I just thought, okay, you know what, the difficulty is kicking in, I am playing on Merciless after all, I don't want to be grinding here forever, I'll just put it down one level. I just wasn't really feeling it, and maybe I was overestimating my skills a little. In any case, the hard setting is still described as significantly challenging, and that doesn't sound bad. But sadly, hard was not challenging in the slightest. The gap between hard and merciless was actually massive, and this was before unlocking the Turgy attacks, by the way, because those really break the difficulty. And after talking to some friends, I found out that even merciless gets really easy once you unlock the Turgies, so I kind of regret putting the difficulty down, as you can't go back to merciless once you go down from it. I really liked it when Persona games used to be a bit more challenging. Persona 3 Fest or Portable were not as hard as an SMT3 Nocturne, but they were just fun challenges. Same thing with Persona 4 Golden, and I played those games on the normal difficulty. I didn't even dare touch the hard setting, let alone merciless, if that was even a thing at those games. But here, I was breezing through hard, and apparently, Merciless wasn't much better. It's just really weird that, for experienced players at least, the significantly challenging hard difficulty doesn't pose any challenge at all, while the exceedingly challenging Merciless difficulty is easily broken by simply using the special attacks. That being said though, I know that this isn't gonna be a criticism for everyone. Some people will definitely find a challenge here, but for me, it was just a bit too easy, and I feel like the problem lies with how the difficulty settings were balanced. But even then, it was still enjoyable, just in a different way. Instead of trying to overcome a challenge, it felt more like I was trying to get through the fight in the fastest, most efficient, and flashiest way possible, by using all the tools that I had available. Persona always has really fun turn-based combat, and it just flows together in a really satisfying way, and Reload is no exception, especially thanks to the added mechanics. There's some stuff like the shift, which isn't exactly new as it was introduced in Persona 5, but it is new to Persona 3, and I really like the way that it's implemented here, as it isn't just an exact copy from the Persona 5 Royal Baton Pass, since they thankfully removed the buffs, and it's presented in a very different way. Instead of doing a literal Baton Pass, here the characters are performing a shift by nodding in each other's direction, and I really like that. The animations for these are also really fucking awesome, by the way, as it really encapsulates all of their personalities. I'm genuinely so happy that the shift or the Baton Pass mechanic looks like it's sticking around for the future of Persona as a franchise. Besides for shifting, Reload also added the Turgy attacks. They're basically just a special attack that every character has to charge up individually, and they all have their own requirements for charging them that fits with their playstyle. And I really love these. They're both really cool visually, but they also work their way into the story. You originally unlock them after you get your battle equipment, which I'm surprised that I haven't mentioned yet, since these outfits are also completely new. I really love them though, it again really strengthens the idea of C's being more than just some teenagers going into a dungeon. They're backed by the Corregio group, they have an anti-shadow weapon with Aegis, and it is said many times that Tartarus is extremely dangerous. So I really love that they gave them these battle uniforms, plus they do just look really cool. But these battle uniforms also come with the new armbands, and these are used to trigger these Turgy attacks. But we already knew this before release, and originally I thought that that would be it. Just a small gimmick, a small excuse to bring in a new flashy special attack. And honestly, if the story implementation for these attacks ended there with the uniforms, I would have been fine with it. But they actually took this a little bit further, as you get this special event with Yukari as she is the first to unlock her Turgy. And this scene was just really nice for her character, so I appreciate the amount of thought and care that went into implementing a new battle mechanic. Plus, it's also kinda funny that Yukari's Turgy is the first one you unlock, seeing as her Turgy animation got leaked months before the game even got announced. So it is quite literally the first Turgy that we all saw. Every character has 2 of these attacks though, with the second one unlocking after that specific character went through a major story moment or point of development. And for some characters, like Junpei, that story moment can even influence what the attack looks like, as he has this absolutely gorgeous animation with Chidori. Another nice detail is the fact that Koromaru has 2 Turgy attacks when you unlock him. With the original game, a lot of people always said that it was a shame that Koromaru's persona never evolves during the main narrative, but this basically confirms the popular theory that Koromaru's persona is actually his second awakening. Which makes a lot of sense, as before the narrative, he already went through a lot of personal growth because of what happened with the priest and stuff. So I honestly adore these Turgy attacks. Not only are they really cool visually, but they're also very unique to each character, they add an extra layer to the combat, and they even add a bit to the story. A final thing that they added are the all-out attack screens, kind of like Persona 5 had, which is just really nice, especially because 1, they just look awesome, and 2, they all feel very unique. Both within the game itself, between characters, but also in contrast to Persona 5. Just like with the shift mechanic, it's not a copy and paste, but they made it feel like it belongs here in this game as well. They did change another thing though, which kinda carried over from Portable, namely the dumbed down AI commands of the party members. In FES or in the OG, you couldn't control your party members directly, only the protagonist. I know that there are a lot of memes about this, with Mitsuru just spamming a certain skill over and over again, but honestly, if you take your time to set up their individual behaviors, it's not that bad at all. But Portable, and now Reload, added direct commands. And personally, I do prefer controlling my party members myself, so while I will always be using direct commands, outside of just adding this feature, they also dumbed down the AI and they removed a lot of the behavior settings, and I just don't see a reason to remove the OG playstyle. It would have been cool if Reload brought back these fleshed out settings from FES, so people could have the choice. Especially as a remake, I feel like it would have been cool to have that element of the original preserved, as this was still part of the original design philosophy. Having more choice is never a bad thing, so I don't really know why they removed this. Generally speaking though, I still don't want to downplay Reload's gameplay or Tartarus, as it is a massive improvement from the OG overall. Yes, I have my issues with it, and yes, it has some missed potential, and it definitely has some flaws which should be mentioned, but that doesn't make it bad or anything even close to that. Tartarus looks better than ever and it plays better than ever, thanks to the new mechanics and the improved movement and layouts. They added some more variety and some more depth, and everything that's new seamlessly works together with what was already there before. But most importantly, it keeps what made Tartarus Tartarus. While playing Reload, it still felt like I was playing through Tartarus. It serves the same purpose and it gives you the same feeling. It's just an evolution of it. Some people might not like it, or they might criticize it for being too long or too repetitive or not scripted enough, but this is exactly what Tartarus is, and that is exactly the type of dungeon that Persona 3 needs. So they didn't change it, and I honestly really appreciate that. I'm actually someone who thinks that a game shouldn't always be focused on being pure quote-unquote fun. That might sound a bit weird, but a game is trying to tell you something. They're trying to make you feel something, and that feeling isn't always I'm having fun right now. It can be sadness or anger or frustration or the feeling of being uncomfortable. But that's the experience that you're going for. And the strength in gaming as a medium is that it can achieve so much more, and it can use so much more than just a narrative to achieve that. And I really respect games that are willing to go for this, because not everyone is gonna be into this design philosophy. Not everyone is gonna vibe with Tartarus because of the reasons that I mentioned. But the game isn't trying to please everyone. It's trying to tell you a story, and it's trying to give you a specific experience. If that experience clicks with you, then you will adore it. But it's not gonna be for everyone, and that's okay. Of course, you can go too far in that philosophy as well. A game does need something to keep you playing, so you kinda need to find this balance where it's trying to get you to feel the emotion that you're supposed to feel, but it's also not supposed to make you annoyed to the point that you dislike playing the game. That balance is hard to find, but I feel like Tartarus hits it perfectly, as yes, it is monotonous and repetitive and really long, but I do genuinely enjoy it, and thanks to the many new mechanics, I enjoyed it even more than in any version before. But you know, Tartarus can definitely still be a massive grind. So thankfully for both you and for the characters, you won't have to spend every single night there, as one really big addition to Reload is how much they expanded upon the night gameplay in the daily life sim. In the other versions of the game, you could very much tell that the design philosophy was, you are a student during the day, while at night you are grinding in the dungeons. There are still some social links at night, namely the monk and Tanaka, but since there were only two, it felt like they were kind of there for you as a backup, for when you or your party members might be too tired for Tartarus that night. Portable started to move away from this structure though, by adding the part-time jobs, but as with many things, Portable didn't really commit since they didn't add anything but that. But Reload really improves on this and brought it to the level that we can see in other Persona games. These additions can range from smaller tweaks to pretty major elements, but all of them create a ripple effect that greatly enhances the entire gameplay loop. A simple thing like being able to access the shared computer in the dorm opens the game up quite a bit, as on this computer you can do a lot of things, leveling your social and combat stats, unlocking a new item shop, or an improved Tartarus stash that strengthens your ambush. Later in the game you even unlock access to a website that levels your social links. This thing helps you with like every mechanic in the whole game, and where before you could only visit Paulonia Mall at night, now they also opened up the strip mall, giving you even more opportunities to level your social stats. As I said before, your schedule in this game is extremely stacked, so being able to level social stats at night gives you the chance to focus on social links during the day, which is a massive improvement from doing literally everything during the day and only going to Tartarus at night. And because the game gives you so many more opportunities to level these stats, it also becomes a lot easier to access the social links of Yukari, Fuka and Mitsuru, since you need to max the corresponding social stats for each of those. It just makes their stories a lot more accessible. The part-time job system is also back in Reload, as this was only in Portable before, and I do like that it's back here. It's kind of just another activity that you can do to level your stats, but they also give you some money. Granted, your main source of income will still be selling random shit that you found in Tartarus, but it's still nice to get some extra cash. These jobs also send you a message every now and then on days that you have an opportunity to make extra money. And while it's not that deep of a mechanic, having random days pop up where you can make more money is pretty neat, as it can often change your plans at the last minute. Maybe that day you were planning to use the PC, but that extra money does seem nice. It again just loops back into this micromanaging of your day-to-day life. It's genuinely just really nice that Reload puts a bigger focus on rebalancing the daily life gameplay, as the original definitely felt kind of bare bones in this aspect. And the way that this content is paced is also impeccably done. In the first few months you can only really explore the city, which then gives you a chance to level your social stats. But after a while, once you're getting more comfortable with your schedule, the game opens up this time slot a bit more, giving you access to the garden on the roof and the night social links. And later it once again opens up by unlocking all of the dorm activities and the shared PC, at which point you might even be overwhelmed a little bit, but in a good way, as you don't really know who you want to hang out with first. Some social stats also still need to be leveled, and the characters are constantly pushing you to progress Tartarus, and you might not even be done with the social links yet. This system then stays the same as you've been introduced to all of the different mechanics, but since you're of course getting new door members over the course of the story, you keep getting new people to hang out with, new skills to unlock, and you get a dog to walk, which keeps opening up the gameplay more and more. But then you reach the end game in December or in January. You leveled all of your social stats, you've gained every ability from the hangouts that there is to gain, you finished the night links, and as I mentioned earlier, you're kind of just left to wander around for the final month. Something that at first might seem like a flaw. Why is there nothing to do at this point? But it fits the mood of this entire month perfectly. It all works together with the narrative to give you the same feeling of hopelessness and reflection. You're just waiting for the end to come around. It's all just so extremely focused and purposeful. The fact that this game exists is honestly a dream come true to me. The original had its fair share of flaws, and so does Reload, both as a remake and as a game on its own. But there also hasn't been, and there will never be, this perfectly crafted game that everyone will give a 10 out of 10 rating. But to me personally, Persona 3 Reload does nearly everything that I ever could have wanted. It does nearly everything that I wanted from not only a remake of Persona 3, but from a game in general. In the way that it's so lightning focused on exploring its themes of life and death, nihilism, and the meaning behind it all. How everything influences each other from the narrative to the gameplay, and how the story has a very tight pacing, where things might start off slow, but it's all done purposefully as it's all just building towards the later arcs. Yes, it has some missed potential, I won't deny that, but to me, the good things outweigh these flaws or these missed potentials by far. In my first ever video on my channel, I said that I wanted Persona 3 to be remade so it could finally reach its full potential, for it to be more accessible, for it to take the things that I loved about the original and to update it to modern standards. And that's exactly what Reload did, if not more. But that also doesn't mean that this replaces any of the other versions. A game is a special piece of art and there is a lot that goes into it. So by completely remaking it, there are always some aspects that will be lost in translations. So while I personally see this as the definitive Persona 3 experience, for others it might miss those very specific elements that they grew attached to. But as someone who always had Persona 3 among my favorite games of all time, Reload had a lot to live up to. And to me, it just did it justice. It retells the story of Persona 3, but it's not afraid to add in new elements, be it with the Link episodes or the new scenes of your party members Strega or Ryoji, among other additions. They're not here to dilute the focus of the narrative, but they only strengthen what was there. Every addition serves a purpose, which is to connect you to these characters and their story even more. While I already loved this cast from the original games, Reload gave us so much more from them, which only made that connection so much stronger and made the key moments hit so much harder. While I always wanted to see more of Shinji or Akihiko, they weren't exactly underutilized either. Their full story was told in any version of Persona 3, so to give these characters that extra time without it feeling like it's done for the sake of it, instead making it all meaningful, is an amazing achievement. This game wasn't made by the exact same team that made the original Persona 3, it's made by people that were fans of the original, who were inspired by it. They know Persona 3 and they know what made this game so special, but maybe most importantly, they also know its flaws. Reload respects the original Persona 3 true and true. You're here to experience Persona 3 and you will. Even if Reload is your only experience with this game, you will be able to hold a conversation with fans that only played the original or only played FES or Portable, as any version shares the same themes, the same story, and it has that same core message that it's trying to bring across. This just is Persona 3 with every fiber of its being. Not only with the story or the characters, but also with Tartarus and the gameplay. While most most of Reload's missed potentials do come from this aspect, in general it still manages to make it a very smooth experience, smoother than any before, designing new mechanics and taking newer elements from later entries in the series and not just copy and pasting them, but fundamentally changing these mechanics to fit this experience, to make it more accessible but also more fun while adding in depth, all the while retaining that feeling that the original gave us, without removing that identity. I don't think I ever played a game that made me connect this much with every single element, from the gameplay and the entire structure down to the story, the characters and the teams. A game has never hit me as hard as Persona 3 Reload did, and while I'm always open for it, I honestly don't think any other game will. In this video, I try to explain why Persona 3 Reload is my personal favorite game of all time, and why I think that, despite its flaws, this is a true masterpiece and a near perfect remake. Thank you for watching. If you are the one person that made it to this point in the video, genuinely thank you so much for watching up to this point. It means so much to me, you have no idea. I've been working on this video for months of my life at this point. Technically, I started working on it back when the game released in February, which is 8 months ago at this point, which is honestly insane. This game just means so much to me, and I poured my everything into this project. It was also kind of tough at times to work on this video, as online Reload has been getting a lot of hate, or at least on Twitter, which is where I spent probably a bit too much of my time, let's be honest. But on there, a lot of people just really don't like Reload, and they say that it's like the bare minimum that a remake can do, and because of that, at times I felt like I'm like the only person that got this much enjoyment out of this game. So even if I don't know what the greater Persona community thinks of Reload, outside of just talking about my personal experience with this game, I also kind of just wanted to defend Reload, I guess, in the public discourse. So if you're someone who is watching this video up to this point, hello, that one person there, don't think anyone else is gonna reach this point, please leave a comment with what you thought of Reload. I don't care if you're new to the series or if you are a veteran that's played Persona 3 on launch on the PS2, just let me know what you thought of this game, as I'm really curious into reading more opinions. I am sorry about the length of this video though, believe it or not, this is the condensed version, and I cut quite a few pages of my script during the process of making this project. And because making this video took me so long, I didn't get to mention episode Aegis, as originally I wanted to release this video before the answer released, but as we all know, that didn't work out, did it? I mean, of course, I could have edited my script and added a whole section talking about the answer, but I thought the video is long enough already. I'll just get it out there like this, a discussion, a breakdown of base game Persona 3 Reload, and maybe one day I'll make a small companion video talking about the answer, as I do have a lot of thoughts on it. That is also why I didn't really mention FemC that much in this video, so if you're someone who's been watching this video and the whole time you've been thinking, where is FemC? Reload sucks because FemC isn't here. I have a lot of pre-release discussion videos on the topic of FemC not being included, so I didn't want to stretch out this video any longer than it already is by rehashing stuff that I've said in those videos. And as I'm talking about not wanting to stretch out this video, I'm gonna end it here. I just wanted to add this little afterword section to explain myself, give some extra context, and just let you guys know why I wasn't uploading for months. And of course, I really just wanted to say, thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it up to this point, again, thank you so much. Please consider giving any support at all. Literally anything is greatly appreciated, be it a like or a comment, sharing the video, subscribing to my channel. I cannot thank you guys enough for any of those things. I really, really appreciate it. But yeah, I'm gonna end the video here before I start to ramble, because I tend to do that if I don't have a script. Or even if I do have a script, I can ramble on sometimes. But yes, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.